In this world, people are killed with swords, fists, and spells made of pure energy. Here, they don't kill like that, with a small piece of metal flying faster than the speed of sound. And so, a 22-year-old blacksmith holds the first bullet in the continent's history in the palm of his hand and thinks of the calm, indifferent face of the man who refused to go down to his dying mother. Now let's rewind. 10 years ago, this blacksmith died. Not here, in another world. A 40-year-old engineer stood at a test bench in a military factory. The bolt jammed. A fragment reached his heart in half a second. He had time to think only one thing. If only I could redo it. And he opened his eyes in a stranger's body by a blazing forge. The first thing he feels is heat. Not warmth, but heat. The kind that instantly makes his skin break out in a sweat. Then comes the sound. The heavy, rhythmic clang of metal against metal. And a voice. "Strike more evenly, son." Cain looks down at his hands. Small, childlike. In his right hand, a hammer that couldn't drive in a single nail. A man in a leather apron stands nearby. Broad shoulders, old and fresh burns mingle on his forearms. Torvin Pharaoh, father. Cain understands this not with his mind, but with something deeper. The body knows what the mind does not. He is 12 years old. Yesterday he was 40. "Hit straighter," his father repeats. And the 40-year-old engineer inside the child's body thinks instantly. Now is not the time to ask questions. Now is the time to survive. Cain strikes, crookedly, weakly, but he strikes. For the next 10 years he remains silent. He learns everything all over again. A foreign language, a foreign body, an impossible world. Here, people channel their inner chi energy through meridians in their bodies and do things that blow the engineer's mind. They fly on swords. They crush stones with their bare hands. They live to be 200 or 300 years old. They are called cultivators. Everyone else is called clay. Cain is clay. Not a single spiritual channel, not a drop of chi. Just a boy in the Pharaoh clan's forge. The smallest and most essential clan of the Song dynasty. Essential because Pharaoh forges the best swords on the Jinghai continent, spiritual blades through which a cultivator channels chi to strike harder. Without these swords, the Song dynasty would have fallen 2 ranks lower. With them, it ranks 3rd in power and holds the southern foothills and the Black Vein mines. The only meteorite steel deposit on the mainland, Cain absorbs everything silently and eagerly. He learns to drive a strike from the hip rather than the shoulder. He learns to read the metal's temperature by a single shade of red. He learns to bow. And that is the hardest part of all. Cultivators pour into the smithy as if it were a shop. They take the swords into which his father has poured 3 months of his life. They toss a small bag of silver onto the workbench. They don't look him in the eye. His father bows, every single time. Low and steady, without anger, without resentment. And every such bow stirs a quiet, cold rage in the 40-year-old engineer, one that makes his teeth grind. But he bows. Because Torvin once spoke 3 words to him. The living blacksmith forges. His mother dies when Cain is 14, a common fever by local standards. A healer from the White Crane sect sits in the guest house 3 yards from the smithy. Torvin goes to him, falls to his knees, begs. The healer looks right through him and mutters something that doesn't sink into the clay. Torvin returns with a blank expression. By morning, his mother is gone. A small, quiet woman who never once raised her voice in 2 years, who slipped him an extra flatbread when his father wasn't looking, who stroked his head before bed, even though deep down he was 30 years older than her. She died of a fever that any cultivator could have cured in half an hour. Because clay. Because her life was worth less than half an hour of someone else's time. Torvin doesn't cry. He goes into the forge and picks up the hammer. That day he forges a sword for Elder Hay, the very same healer who didn't come down. And then something inside Cain breaks. Or, on the contrary, falls into place. Torvin isn't broken. Torvin does the only thing he can. He lives. A living blacksmith forges. A dead one forges nothing. But Cain isn't Torvin. Cain has a different memory, a different understanding of power. In the world he came from, there were also plenty of those who decided who would live and who would die. And then something appeared, small, metallic, flying very fast, and everyone became equal. For 8 years, Cain has been preparing, unhurriedly, without drawing attention. By day he forges swords, spearheads, horseshoes, whatever is ordered. By night he thinks. He sketches in his mind the barrel, the bolt, the rifling, the primer, the gunpowder. He runs through every tolerance, every angle, every proportion. He remembers everything. But there are no CNC machines here, no precision drills, no chemistry lab. Just a hammer, an anvil, a forge, and his hands. And meteorite steel, harder than anything he'd ever known, yet as brittle as glass when it breaks. He has to reinvent everything, from scratch, with what he has. And so he is 22, and he takes his first step. Night. The basement beneath the smithy. His father snores upstairs. The furnace has burned down to embers. On the workbench are 3 clay crucibles that Cain molded and fired in secret. One contains lead shavings. The second holds steel filings from the sword of the sun heir. The third is empty. In it, Cain will cast the first bullet of this world. 3 hours of work. He melts the lead, pours it into a soapstone mold, waits, removes it. A small object lies in the palm of his hand. 12 grams, a conical body, a lead jacket, a steel core. Cain holds it up to the coals and examines it in the red glow. Perfect. Not by the standards of his past life. By the standards of this world, where there is not a single object of this shape, not a single tool with this purpose. He clenches the bullet in his fist. It's warm. He closes his eyes and sees his mother's face, then Elder Hay's face, calm, indifferent. This bullet doesn't know who Elder Hay is. It knows nothing of spiritual roots. It doesn't distinguish rank. It simply flies and hits, and everything that came before it ends. Cain hides the bullet in a tin box and slips it into a crack in the foundation. He needs a barrel. He needs gunpowder, saltpeter, sulfur, coal. 75 to 15 to 10. He remembers. He needs a primer, explosive mercury. Mercury is available at the alchemist's market. He'll distill the nitric acid himself. He needs one person who knows how to keep quiet. It will take 6 months, and no one must suspect a thing. His mother died because they deemed her unworthy. His father remains silent because he has no choice. Cain has a choice. He falls asleep quickly, the way those who have finally made a decision fall asleep. The next morning, he gets up before dawn and goes to the smithy. Torvin is already there. He nods. Cain stands at the forge and pumps the bellows. An ordinary morning, an ordinary day. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed. The alchemist's market was located in the lower city at the foot of Mount Linyon. 3 streets of covered stalls with tiled awnings and the smell of sulfur that stung the nose from 200 paces away. Cultivators came here for ingredients for elixirs and potions. Blacksmiths also came here for tempering compounds. Cain came for both. Only what he called tempering compounds was used by no blacksmith on the continent. He started with saltpeter, white crystals sold in every shop under the name moon salt. Alchemists added it to cleansing potions. Cain bought 10 gin and said he was trying a new method of cooling steel. The merchant wasn't surprised. The blacksmiths of Pharaoh were always experimenting. Then sulfur, yellow powder, cheap and readily available. Then charcoal. There was plenty of that in the smithy. Cain didn't buy everything in one place. He didn't buy everything in one day. 3 shops, 3 merchants, 3 different reasons. He knew that paranoia wasn't a flaw. It was a necessary condition for survival when you were about to change the world and the world hadn't asked for it yet. He mixed the first batch of gunpowder in the basement a week after casting the bullet. A clay pot, a mortar and pestle, 75 parts saltpeter, 15 parts charcoal, 10 parts sulfur. Everything ground into a fine powder and mixed dry. Then he added water until it reached the consistency of thick porridge. He stirred it. He rubbed it through a piece of coarse cloth to obtain the desired grain size. He spread it out on a clay baking sheet and left it to dry by the cooling stove. 2 days later, the gunpowder was ready. Cain took a pinch and held it to a coal. A flash, white smoke, a sharp smell. His hands didn't tremble. His head was clear and cool. It works. He hid the pot in the same crack in the foundation where the bullet had been. Now the barrel. That was the main problem. Anyone who knows how to melt lead can cast a bullet. Anyone who knows the proportions can mix gunpowder. But the barrel is different. The barrel is the heart of the weapon. The barrel must withstand the pressure of the burning powder gases and not burst. It must direct the bullet precisely at the target. It must have rifling that spins the bullet around its axis and stabilizes it in flight. And it must be made of steel that is both hard and tough. Hard so it doesn't deform, tough so it doesn't burst. Local spiritual steel wasn't suitable for this. It was made for swords, extremely hard. It conducted chi the way a copper wire conducts electricity, but it would shatter under bending without warning. A barrel made of spiritual steel would blow apart on the 3rd shot. Cain knew this because in his past life he'd seen what happens when you take and try to make a barrel out of it. Nothing good. He needed a different kind of steel, carbon steel, with a carbon content of 30 to 40 hundredths of a percent, with added nickel for toughness, with the right heat treatment, normalizing, oil quenching, tempering at 400 degrees. He knew how to do all this in theory. In his past life, he hadn't stood at the furnace. He stood at a drafting table. But he knew how barrel steel was made because he had worked for 20 years with people who forged it. He knew the purpose of every element. He knew what would happen if you removed the nickel or overquenched it. The theory was in his head. His hands were at his side. The hands of a 22-year-old blacksmith who had held a hammer for 10 years. All that remained was to connect the two. Cain began his experiments, in secret, at night. He took scraps of steel from his father's trash can, remelted them in a small crucible, added carbon from charcoal, changed the proportions, forged samples and broke them by hand, checked the fracture, examined the grain, recorded the results not on paper, but in his head. Paper can be found, a mind cannot. It took 3 weeks to get the composition right. Not perfect, workable. Steel that won't burst on the 3rd shot and won't swell on the 10th. Steel that can withstand the pressure of black powder and last at least 50 shots. That's enough for a prototype. He'll improve it later. Right now, he needs a proof of concept. He decided to make the barrel using a method no one in this world knew: deep drilling. There were drills in Pharaoh's forge, rough ones, for wood and soft metal. Over 3 nights, Cain forged a new drill bit from his steel, long, thin, with a groove to carry away the shavings, and he began drilling the blank. A steel cylinder clamped in a vise, the drill in his hands, oil for cooling. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter. 3 hours on the first night, and he'd gone 5 centimeters. Another 3 hours on the second night, and another 5. The barrel was supposed to be 20 centimeters long, short for a pistol. Cain wasn't going to start with a rifle. A pistol is simpler, more compact, easier to hide. 4 nights of drilling, then 2 more for the rifling. He made the rifling with a reamer, a steel rod with protrusions that cut grooves inside the barrel as it's pulled through. 6 grooves spaced 250 millimeters apart. He ran the rod through the barrel 27 times before the grooves reached the right depth. After each pass, he checked for light. He aligned it. He counted the revolutions. By the end, his hands were shaking from fatigue, but the rifling was even, clean, 6 spiral grooves disappearing into the darkness of the barrel. Cain looked into the barrel at the light and smiled for the first time in 10 years. A real smile. Not that polite grin he'd learned to flash in front of the cultivators, but the way an engineer smiles when he sees that the formula has worked out and the metal has obeyed. The primer remained. The most dangerous part. Explosive mercury. An explosive substance for igniting the charge. In his past life, primer mixtures were made in factories with exhaust systems and reinforced walls. Cain was going to do this in the basement. He bought the mercury at the alchemist's market. There it was called liquid silver and used in a dozen recipes for baldness. He distilled the nitric acid he distilled himself from saltpeter and copper sulfate in a clay apparatus he'd assembled overnight. The process was simple in theory. Dissolve the mercury in nitric acid, heat it, wait for crystals to form, dry it. Don't blow yourself up. The last point was key. Mercury fulminate detonates from impact, friction, or sudden heating. Cain worked so slowly that in 4 hours he obtained less than a gram of the substance. But that was enough. 1 gram of fulminate of mercury makes 10 caps, and for now, he only needed 1. He filled a tiny copper cap with fulminate of mercury powder. He covered it with foil, crimped the edges. A cap. Cain held it between 2 fingers and thought that in this world, where the elders could level mountains with a single blow, the most dangerous thing right now lay between his thumb and index finger, and it weighed less than a grain of rice. He assembled the cartridge that very night. A paper casing, bottom, the primer, above it the powder charge, on top a bullet pressed into the neck. A unitary cartridge, primitive, paper, disposable, functional. Next he needed a frame, a receiver, a firing mechanism. That was easier. That was what Cain had been doing his whole life. He designed it in his head and forged it with his hands. The frame was made from a single piece of steel. The barrel was inserted and secured with a pin, a spring-loaded hammer, a trigger. Everything was rough. Everything worked. 10 days after the first bullet, he had a pistol. Single shot, percussion cap, a 20-centimeter barrel, about 10 millimeters in caliber. An ugly hunk of metal without a single beautiful line. Cain held it in his hands and felt a weight that couldn't be measured in grams. He needed to test it, but not here. Not in the basement beneath the smithy, where every sound could be heard upstairs. He needed a place where he could fire a shot and where no one would hear. And there was such a place. The abandoned tunnels of the Black Vein began 3 miles west of the forge. 300 years ago, meteorite steel was mined here until the vein was exhausted and the miners were transferred to new workings further east. What remained was a network of tunnels leading deep into the mountain. Cain knew about them because at 14, he used to climb in there with the local boys on a dare. Back then, he remembered one tunnel, long, straight, dry, with thick stone walls that muffled sound like a pillow. A perfect shooting range. He went at night. The pistol was wrapped in an oil-soaked rag and hidden under his jacket. 1 bullet in his pocket. 1. Because each bullet cost him 4 hours of work and a few grams of fulminate of mercury, of which he had only 9 left. He couldn't afford to waste more than 1 on the first test. An oil lamp. Dim. The light reached 3 steps ahead. Cain walked down the tunnel and listened. Silence. A drop of water somewhere far away. His own breathing. He walked 100 steps deeper and stopped. He set the lamp on a rock. He took out the pistol. He cocked it. His hands were dry, calm, as if he'd done this 1,000 times. Because in a sense he had. Not with these hands, not with this gun, but the principle was the same. First, the target. Cain didn't have a straw dummy. He found a flat rock the size of a human head and leaned it against the tunnel wall 30 paces away. Then he loaded it. He tilted the barrel back. He inserted a round. He closed it. He cocked the hammer. He raised the pistol with his arm outstretched. He took aim. The front sight was rough. There was no rear sight. At 30 paces, it didn't matter. He smoothly pulled the trigger. The world split apart. The sound in the stone tunnel hit so hard that Kane's ears popped. A white flash. Thick, acrid smoke billowed out. His arm was thrown back and up. The recoil was brutal. A 10mm caliber and black powder in an enclosed space is no joke. Kane stood and waited for the smoke to clear. His ears were ringing. The smell of sulfur filled his nose. He picked up the flashlight and walked over to the target. The rock lay on the ground, split into 3 pieces. The bullet had entered the center and gone right through. A finger-deep dent remained in the wall behind the rock. Kane picked up one of the fragments and looked at the entry hole. Clean, smooth. The bullet hadn't veered off course. The rifling had done its job. He crouched down. He placed the fragment on the ground. He covered his face with his hands. And he cried. For the first time in 10 years. Not out of joy. Not out of grief. Because the formula had worked. 12 grams of lead and steel had pierced a rock 30 paces away. A rock that any cultivator could have shattered with a fist. But a cultivator's fist belongs to the cultivator, but the bullet belongs to whoever pulls the trigger. Anyone. A blacksmith, a miner, a girl carrying coal. Kane wiped his face with his sleeve. He stood up. He examined the pistol. The barrel was intact. The frame was intact. The trigger mechanism had functioned as intended. No cracks, no deformations. 50 shots is the minimum, maybe 100. He wrapped the pistol back in the rag and headed for the exit. He stopped at the entrance to the tunnel. The moon was full and white. The mountains around him were black. Silence. Kane stood there and thought about how, just a few minutes ago, a sound had echoed through these mountains that the world of Jinghai had never heard in all its 1,000-year history. And no one had noticed. For now. On the way back, he thought about the next steps. The gun works. The prototype is confirmed. Now it's time to scale up. More gunpowder, more caps, more barrels. But for that, he needs people. One man cannot do everything. An engineer understands this better than anyone. A single master cannot win a war. A workshop can. Division of labor, templates, calibers, interchangeable parts. Here, every sword is unique. Every blacksmith works as he feels. It is a craft. A beautiful, meaningless craft. Kane needed a production line. But before building the workshop, he had to find the first person. Someone who knew how to keep quiet. Lian Ho appeared at Pharaoh's Forge 3 days after the trial. 13 years old, the daughter of a black vein miner, small and thin as a twig. Coal dust had dug so deep under her nails that no soap could wash it away. She was sent to carry coal. In the miners' settlement, children worked from the age of 10. Those who had parents worked for their parents. Those without parents worked for everyone else. Lian had a dead father who had been buried in a tunnel a year ago. 2 younger brothers she fed, and not a single spiritual channel in her body. Pure clay. She hauled baskets of coal from the warehouse to the furnace, silently, quickly, not a single wasted movement. Kane didn't pay her any attention for the first 2 days. On the 3rd day, he noticed something. Lian was standing by the workbench while Kane was drawing up a blueprint for a steel bolt for the dynasty's gate. He stepped away to get some water. He came back. Lian was at the other end of the forge with a basket of coal. The blueprint lay untouched where it was, but Kane saw how she was looking, not at the paper, at the lines, with the same expression a hungry person has when looking at bread. On the 4th day, he tested her. He left a drawing of a simple hinge on the workbench, deliberately complex, with 12 dimensions and 3 cross-sections. He stepped away. He waited. Lian approached. She looked. She walked away. That evening, Kane pulled her aside and asked her to draw on the ground with a stick what she had seen that morning. Leanne sat down silently and began to draw. All 12 dimensions, all 3 cross-sections. Not a single mistake, not a single line out of place. Perfect visual memory. Cain looked at the drawing on the ground and felt something click inside him. That very click an engineer feels when he finds the part that solves the problem. He wiped the drawing away with his foot. He looked at Leanne. She looked at him blankly, waiting, ready to be scolded for staring at the drawing instead of hauling coal. Cain said she would come in an hour early tomorrow morning and that he would show her something. Leanne nodded. She didn't ask what. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and went to get the next basket of coal. The next morning, Cain showed her gunpowder. Not a pistol, not a bullet, just gunpowder. A small mound of gray grains on a clay dish. He held up a piece of coal. A flash, white smoke. Leanne didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She leaned closer and looked at the dish, then at Cain, then back at the dish. And she asked the first question Cain had ever heard from her. What does it do? Not what is it? What does it do? A 13-year-old girl who carried coal for food asked the only right question. Cain answered, briefly, without details. He said it was a substance that propelled a small piece of metal very fast, so fast that the metal pierced stone. Leanne was silent. Then she said that stone was fine, but stone didn't wear armor or fly on a sword. Cain looked at her for a long time. Then he smiled and said she was right, and that was exactly why he needed her help. Leanne turned out to be better than Cain had expected. Not just her memory, her hands, slender fingers accustomed to fine work. Her father, a miner, had taught her to sort ore by touch and to distinguish 20 types of rock by weight and texture, blindfolded. Cain gave her her first task, to measure out gunpowder into paper cartridges, exactly 3 grams in each, without scales. Leanne asked how much that was by eye. Cain demonstrated once. She repeated it 10 times in a row. He checked. The variance was less than 1/4 of a gram. For black powder it didn't matter. It mattered to Cain. He realized he'd found more than just an assistant. He'd found his first apprentice. For the first 2 weeks, he didn't show her the gun, just the components. Gunpowder, caps, bullets, each element separately. She didn't ask how it all fit together. She memorized. She did. She remained silent. Cain told her the rules. First, not a word to anyone. Not to her brothers, not to her friends, to no one. Leanne looked at him as if he were explaining that water is wet. She knew how to keep quiet before she learned to speak. Second, if anyone asks what she does in the mornings at the forge, she helps young Pharaoh with hardening. It's true. He really did teach her the basics of heat treatment between sessions of loading cartridges. Third, if something goes wrong, if they're found out, she knows nothing. She just hauled coal and followed orders. All responsibility lies with Cain. Leanne listened. She nodded and said she wouldn't accept the third rule. If they were discovered, she'd be right there. Because her father had died alone under the rubble, and she wasn't going to repeat his mistake. Cain said nothing. He didn't argue. A month later, they had 30 cartridges and a well-established process. Leanne prepared the casings and loaded the gunpowder. Cain cast the bullets and assembled the primers. Together, they worked twice as fast as Cain did alone. Their main work continued in parallel, 1,000 swords for the Song dynasty. An order Torvin had received a year and a half ago. The deadline was looming. The Pharaoh clan consisted of 12 blacksmiths, including apprentices. 1,000 spiritual swords in a year and a half meant 83 swords a month. 1 sword per blacksmith per month, plus a reserve for rejects and reworks. The pace was grueling. His father worked 14 hours a day. Cain worked alongside him. He forged ordinary blades, not spiritual ones, the simpler ones. He learned from his father. He watched as Torvin wove streams of chi into the steel while forging. Cain couldn't do that. He didn't have chi. But he could do something else. He could make better steel. Sword number 314, an ordinary blade for a mid-level officer. Cain forged it in 3 days instead of the usual 5, not because he was in a hurry, because he changed the process. Instead of the traditional multi-layered forging, where the strip is folded and hammered 100 times, he used a different method, homogenization, a single alloy with a precisely calibrated composition. Carbon, manganese, silicon, all in proportions unknown here. The result? A blade that conducted chi 12% better than usual. Torvin took the sword in his hands. He ran his finger along the blade. He looked at his son, silently, for a long time. Then he placed the sword on the rack and returned to his work. That evening at dinner, he said one sentence. "Tomorrow you'll show me how you did it." Cain showed him. Not everything, just the part that concerned swords. The new alloy proportions, the new heat treatment process. His father listened. He asked questions, insightful, precise. Every question hit the mark. Cain realized something important that day. Torvin Farrow was not an uneducated blacksmith who swung a hammer out of habit. Torvin was a master, a true one of those who understands metal not with his mind, but with his whole body. He lacked theory, the knowledge that had accumulated over centuries in Cain's world, but his intuition was flawless. Over 2 weeks, they reworked the forging process together. The swords became better, significantly. The electrical conductivity was 15 to 20% higher. The bending strength was a third higher. The forging time was cut by 2 days. Torvin looked at the results and shook his head, not out of surprise, out of something else, as if something he had long suspected had been confirmed. Elder Hay came for his sword a month after Cain began working with the new method. The problem was that the sword wasn't ready yet. Torvin had taken to his bed. He'd overworked himself. 14 hours at the forge every day for a year, and even a blacksmith's iron body gives out. He lay on a mat, gray and silent, coughing up blood. Cain understood. An ulcer, maybe something worse. Without a healer, you couldn't say for sure, and healers don't come down to the clay. Elder Hayes stood in the smithy's courtyard, tall, upright, white robes without a single stain. His face was calm and cold as a winter sky. He said he'd been promised the sword by this week. Cain went out to him, bowed, low. He said the sword was ready and required only a final check. He asked him to wait until morning. The elder frowned but nodded. He was used to waiting for clay. Clay always asks for a little more time. Cain returned to the forge. He didn't have a finished sword for Elder Hay. He had a blank that his father had set aside as a reject. It had cracked during tempering. The crack ran from the pommel to the middle of the blade. His father was going to remelt it next week. Cain picked up the blank. He examined it. The crack was deep, but not all the way through. Under normal circumstances, this metal would be remelted. But these were not normal circumstances. Cain lit the forge. He heated the blank, and he began to do something that no one in this world had ever done. Welding by forging with an additive. He took a thin strip of his alloy, the very one with nickel and the right carbon content, and placed it over the crack. He heated both metals until they glowed a light yellow and began to forge. Blow after blow, evenly, precisely, without a single unnecessary movement. The filler metal fused into the base metal. The crack disappeared. But something else happened. The nickel from the filler metal diffused into the blade's tempered steel, a thin layer, a few microns, and it changed the structure. Cain hadn't planned this. He'd just wanted to patch the crack. But when he finished forging and ran his finger along the blade, he felt it. Not chi. He couldn't feel chi. He felt how the metal had changed. Denser, more uniform, more alive. In the morning, Elder He took the sword. He ran his finger along the blade. He frowned. He channeled his chi. His eyes widened. The sword sang. A thin, high-pitched sound on the verge of audibility. Chi conductivity 20% higher than normal, at least. The elder looked at Cain. For the first time in 10 years, he looked at him, not through him, at him. He asked his name. Cain bowed lower than necessary. He said his name was Cain Pharaoh, a simple apprentice to his father. The elder nodded. He sheathed his sword. He left. Cain stood in the courtyard and watched his back. Remember my face. In 2 years, you'll look at me differently, if you're lucky. That evening, Cain sat by his father's bed. Torvin slept heavily. His breathing was raspy. Cain looked at his hands, huge, covered in scars and burns, hands that had forged the best swords on the continent for 30 years, and in 30 years had not received a single word of thanks from a single cultivator. Hands that could not save his wife because that required not steel, but chi. Cain stood up. He went down to the basement. He sat down at the workbench.
He took a pistol out of a hiding place. He placed 3 bullets next to it. And he began sketching the next model in his head. Not a pistol, a rifle. News of the sword spread quickly, not among people, among cultivators. Elder Hay showed the blade to 2 colleagues at the Dynasty Council. They tested it. They confirmed it. The chi conductivity was at least 20% higher than normal. For a swordsman, that's the difference between life and death in a fight between equals. A week later, 3 orders for identical blades arrived at the Pharaoh Forge. 2 weeks later, 7. Cain was not pleased. He saw a trap. The better the swords, the more questions. Where did the new technique come from? Who taught it? Was the Pharaoh clan selling secrets to outsiders? Had they gotten involved with demonic practices? In a world where power is a privilege, knowledge that increases power automatically becomes suspect. He began to pace himself. He made the next 4 swords 15% better than usual, not 20, a good improvement, but not shocking. Explained by the talent of a young blacksmith who had inherited his father's instinct. The 5th sword was 18% better. The 6th was 15% again. A smooth curve of improvement. Natural, not cause for panic. Torvin recovered slowly. He was back on his feet in 2 weeks. In 3, he returned to the forge. But he no longer worked 14-hour days. He worked 10. Cain took on part of his workload. Between the standard swords for the army order, he inserted his experimental blades. His father watched. He said nothing. Once, one evening at dinner, he asked where his son had learned what he was doing. Cain replied that he had thought, a lot, for a long time, at night. Torvin looked at him, and in that gaze Cain saw something new. Not suspicion, not fear. Recognition. As if his father saw in his son someone he remembered, or someone he had been told about. Torvin said nothing. He turned away to his bowl of rice. Cain didn't press the issue. The time would come. Meanwhile, work continued in the basement. Leanne came every morning an hour before dawn. She loaded cartridges. She sorted bullets by weight. She was learning. Cain explained to her things that had no names in this world. Pressure, combustion temperature, bullet velocity, trajectory. She listened. She memorized. Sometimes she asked questions that took Cain's breath away. Because these were questions a second-year ballistics student would ask, if such a course existed. Once she asked why a spinning bullet flies straighter than one that doesn't spin. Cain spent an hour explaining the gyroscopic effect using a spinning top as an example. Leanne spun a wooden top on the workbench and watched. Then she said she understood, and added that if the rifling were sharper, the bullet would spin faster and fly straighter over a greater distance. Cain said yes, but there was a limit because rifling that was too sharp increased friction and reduced muzzle velocity. Leanne nodded and said that meant a balance was needed. Cain looked at her. 13 years old, carries coal for food, not a single day in school. And she's articulating the principle of barrel rifling optimization, something that,
in his old world, would have earned an engineering degree. He told her that day that she wasn't just a helper, she was his first apprentice. Leanne didn't answer, only her hands on her knees clenched into fists, and her eyes grew wet. For a second. Then she blinked, and her face was blank and calm again.
Cain pretended not to notice. The mercury was running out. What he'd bought at the market was enough for 20 capsules. He needed more. But buying mercury regularly meant drawing attention. Alchemists are talkative. Merchants are even more so. Cain needed a steady supply line, a quiet one, inconspicuous, reliable. The answer came in the form of a woman with gold earrings and a dozen knives hidden under her clothes. Hana So appeared at the lower city market in the middle of the third month, a caravan of 6 wagons, goods from the southern coast, fabrics, spices, alchemical reagents. Cain noticed her because she was trading in mercury in quantities that didn't fit within the bounds of ordinary trade. 3 jinn at a time. That's a lot, a whole lot, even for alchemists. He approached her, asked the price. Hana looked him up and down. She was 24, tall, tanned. Her laugh was so infectious that passers-by turned to look 3 stalls away. She asked why a young blacksmith needed mercury. Cain said it was for a rejuvenating elixir. Hana laughed and said that he was lying, but lying in an interesting way. She named a price, triple the usual. Cain paid without haggling. Hana stopped laughing. A man who pays triple the price without haggling is either a fool or knows exactly what he needs and doesn't want to waste time. Cain didn't look like a fool. She said she'd be in town once a month. If he needed mercury on a regular basis, she could arrange it. Cain said he needed more than just mercury: saltpeter, sulfur, copper sulfate, nitric acid if available, lead ingots. Hana listened, and with every name her face grew more serious. This wasn't a list of rejuvenating elixirs. It was a list of ingredients that, individually, were harmless, but together formed something entirely different. Hana didn't know what, but she knew the trade, and she knew that the lists people buy in secret and at triple the price are the lists that change the world. She named a new price, for the entire set, for regular deliveries, for her silence. Cain looked her in the eyes and said he agreed. The first shipment arrived a month later, 6 sacks in inconspicuous baskets under a layer of dried fish. Hana brought everything, including nitric acid in sealed ceramic bottles, including the lead that was supposedly meant for fishing net weights. She didn't ask why. Not yet. Cain knew the questions would come, that sooner or later he'd have to tell her the truth, or part of the truth. But not now. Right now, he had a supply. At the same time, Cain was thinking about another problem: location. The basement under the blacksmith's shop was fine for a prototype. It wasn't suitable for production. Too small, too close to the house, too easy to spot. He needed a workshop, separate, hidden, with enough space for work and storage. The black vein tunnels. The answer was obvious. Abandoned for 300 years. No one goes there. The stone walls muffle sound, natural ventilation through the old shafts. There's enough space for a dozen workstations. Cain began preparing the tunnel, at night, alone. He cleared the debris at the entrance. He reinforced the vault in 2 places where the stone had begun to crumble. He brought in a workbench, tools, crucibles, a supply of coal, lanterns. In 3 weeks, the tunnel had turned into a workshop. Rough, dark, cold, but functional. He conducted the first test in the new workshop together with Leanne. 30 paces, a straw dummy that Leanne had tied together from sheaves and dressed in an old miner's leather jacket. Cain loaded, aimed, fired. The bullet entered the dummy's chest and exited through the back, taking a chunk of straw and leather with it. Leanne stood nearby. She covered her mouth with her hand, not out of fear. She saw the hole in the jacket and understood what it meant. The armor of a mid-level cultivator is no thicker than this leather. Cain reloaded, second shot, third, fourth, fifth. 5 bullets, 5 holes.
all within a palm's width of the center. From 30 paces away, offhand. Cain lowered the pistol. His hands weren't shaking. Leanne walked over to the mannequin. She touched the holes. She turned to Cain. She said that this thing could kill a cultivator. She didn't ask, she stated it, affirmatively. Cain nodded. A standard one. At the stage of body laying or chi condensation, they won't have time to put up a shield if they aren't expecting a shot, and they aren't expecting one, because they don't know what a shot is. Leanne was silent for a minute. Then she asked, "What if higher up?" The golden core, the merging of souls. Cain said they'd need a different bullet for that. Faster, heavier, from a greater distance. We need a rifle. We need smokeless powder. We need time.
Leanne nodded.
She looked at the pistol in his hands. She looked at him, and she said 4 words that Cain would remember forever. "I'll wait." They returned to the village before dawn. Cain hid the pistol in a secret compartment in the tunnel. Leanne went to her barracks to her sleeping brothers. The world was still asleep. The mountains were dark and quiet. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Cain counted the days. 4 months since the first bullet. 2 months since the first shot. In the tunnels stood 16 ready-to-fire cartridges in a tin box and 1 ugly pistol wrapped in an oil-stained rag. It wasn't enough. Catastrophically little. But the main problem wasn't the quantity. The main problem stood at the smithy's gate and introduced himself as Master Zhao, an inspector from the Song dynasty, short, lean, with a neat goatee and eyes that missed nothing. Formally, he had arrived to oversee an order for 1,000 swords, to monitor deadlines and quality, standard practice of the dynasty for large shipments. Torvin received him as expected, a bow, tea, the guest room in the house. Master Zhao was a cultivator, chi condensation stage, not a high rank,
but enough to kill any blacksmith in the clan with a single flick of the wrist.
He walked through the forge. He watched. He took notes. He touched the blanks. He asked questions that sounded harmless but hit too close to home. Why was this alloy darker than usual? Where did the new hardening formula come from? Who taught young Pharaoh how to work with nickel? Cain answered calmly. "I'm experimenting, learning from my father, trying different compositions." Master Zhao nodded. He took notes and continued watching. Cain understood immediately. This wasn't an inspector. This was a spy. Someone up high had noticed that Pharaoh's swords had improved and wanted to know why. Not out of gratitude, out of fear. In the Song dynasty, as in any of the 7 great houses, secrets equaled power. A new secret in the hands of a small blacksmith clan is a threat, because a secret can be sold, or passed on to the enemy, or used as a bargaining chip. Cain stopped working in the basement, completely. He moved everything to the tunnel. He left the hiding place in the foundation empty. If Master Zhao searches the house, he'll find an ordinary smithy belonging to an ordinary clan.
Nothing out of the ordinary. He warned Leanne. No morning visits, no conversations in front of outsiders. She comes to the smithy to carry coal and leaves, period. Leanne nodded. Not a word, not a question. She simply slipped back into the role of the girl with the basket, as if the last 2 months had never happened. Cain appreciated it. Master Zhao stayed at the forge for a week, then 2, then a month. He didn't leave. The inspection period had long since expired, but he stayed. He helped with the forging. He gave advice. He drank tea with Torvin in the evenings. He settled in. Torvin put up with it, silently, as best he could. But Cain could see that it was hard on his father, a stranger in the house, stranger's eyes watching his every move, a stranger's presence in a space that had always been theirs alone. One evening, Torvin said one sentence to his son. "Be careful with him." He didn't say why. He didn't explain. Cain understood anyway. His father knew that his son was hiding something. He didn't know exactly what, but he sensed it. And now that a man with piercing eyes had moved into the house, Torvin was afraid.
Not for himself, for his son. Cain worked in the mine at night. He left after midnight when Master Zhao fell asleep in the guest room. He'd return before dawn. 4 hours of sleep. During the day, he forged swords. In the evening, he answered the inspector's questions. At night, he assembled cartridges and designed a rifle. His body held on by sheer stubbornness. The rifle was an order of magnitude more complex than a pistol. A long barrel, at least 60 centimeters, deeper, more precise rifling, a wooden stock, a sighting rail with a front sight and rear sight, and most importantly, the bolt. The pistol had no bolt. A break-open barrel and manual reloading. That wouldn't work for a rifle. He needed a mechanism that would allow him to shoot faster, to reload faster. No time wasted between shots. Cain designed a breech loading system with a swing-out block, not a sliding bolt. That would have required a metal cartridge case, which he couldn't produce yet. The swing-out block was simpler. A lever lowers the bolt block. The breech of the barrel opens. A cartridge is inserted. The lever rises. The block closes the breech. The trigger is cocked. Fire. The lever lowers. The spent cartridge is ejected manually. The cycle takes 5 seconds. Rough, slow, but 10 times faster than reloading a pistol, and at a range of 300 paces, not 30. He sketched every detail in his head. Then he forged it. Then he adjusted it. Then he reworked it. It took 4 nights just for the bolt assembly, another 3 for the shell extractor, 2 more for the trigger mechanism. He made the barrel in a week, using the same method as for the pistol. Deep drilling, rifling, only longer, more precise, more patient. He carved the stock from mountain ash, hardwood, dense, doesn't warp from moisture. After a month of night work, the rifle was ready. Long, heavy, over 5 kilograms, with a rough wooden stock and iron parts that didn't shine but glowed a somber gray in the lantern light. Cain raised it to his shoulder. He aimed into the darkness of the tunnel. The stock rested against his shoulder just right. The front sight found the rear sight. The line of sight was clear. He lowered the rifle. The test would be tomorrow. Leanne came to the tunnel the following night. She saw the rifle on the workbench. She stopped. She walked over. She touched the barrel with her fingertips. She ran her fingers along the stock, along the bolt handle, along the trigger guard. She didn't know what it was yet, but she had seen a pistol and understood the principle. Longer means farther. She asked how many paces. Cain said they'd find out now. The target stood 100 paces away, a 3-finger-thick slab of solid oak. Behind it, the stone wall of the tunnel. Cain loaded it, raised it, took aim, pulled the trigger. The roar in the tunnel was deafening, heavier than a pistol, deeper. The recoil drove the stock into his shoulder. Thick smoke billowed out. When it cleared, Cain and Leanne approached the target. The board was split in half. The bullet had gone right through and embedded itself 2 fingers deep into the stone. At 100 paces. Cain inspected the barrel. Intact. The bolt assembly was in place. The extractor had worked. The shell casing had ejected. He reloaded. Second shot. Third. Fourth. Fifth. 5 out of 5. The barrel held up. By the 5th shot, it had heated up so much it burned his fingers through the cloth, but it held. Cain sat down on a rock. He rested the rifle on his knees. He looked at Leanne. She was standing by the shattered target and touched the entry hole. She turned. Her face bore an expression Cain had seen only once in his life, in a past life, on the face of a young test engineer who, for the first time, saw a new design work exactly as it did on the blueprint. A mixture of awe and eager anticipation. She said one word. More. Cain nodded. More. But not today. Today they're leaving. Because the sound of 5 shots in the mountains at night is a risk. A small one, but a risk. And Master Zhao is a light sleeper. The 5th month. Cain sat in the tunnel by the light of 3 lanterns and counted. Not money. Resources. enough lead for 120 bullets, enough gunpowder for 80 charges, enough fulminate of mercury for 40 caps, enough barrel steel for 2 barrels. It wasn't enough, not even close. He needed someone who knew how to count, not in the sense of arithmetic, in the sense of logistics, supply chains, inventories, cost of goods sold, consumption forecasts. Sun Yihe, the fourth daughter of the head of the dynasty. Cain knew of her from rumors circulating among blacksmiths and servants. Beautiful, smart, useless, so they said.
Her spiritual root had opened incorrectly. The foundation stage. The ceiling. For the daughter of the head of the dynasty, this was like having no root at all. Her sisters were at the golden core stage. Her brothers were at chi condensation and above. But she was stuck at the first stage, and everyone knew she wouldn't go any further. But she received the best education in the dynasty: strategy, economics, diplomacy, the history of all 7 houses. She knew numbers better than the Sun treasurers, because the treasurers only had to count silver, while she counted everything: trade flows, harvests, army maintenance costs, ore reserves. She remembered every figure and could connect every figure to another. Cain met her by chance, or perhaps not by chance. Sun Yihe had come to the Pharaoh Forge to inspect the meteorite steel reserves, a formal visit. Once a quarter, someone from the Sun family checked to make sure the clan wasn't stealing raw materials. Usually the secretary came. This time she came, because she was bored. Because she was 18 years old, and the only thing she was allowed to do was routine bookkeeping, which the other family members considered beneath them. She entered the forge, and the world grew quieter. Not from force, from presence. Slender, upright. Her hair was pulled back under a white jade comb. She was calm and closed off, like a box without a keyhole. She surveyed the supplies, jotted down the numbers, asked Torvin 3 questions about steel consumption for different types of blades. Torvin answered. She nodded, turned toward the exit. Cain stood by the forge and looked at her notes, thin columns of numbers on a silk scroll, neat, precise. He spotted a mistake, not in her figures, in the dynasty's standard regulations. The steel consumption for a 3rd-class spirit sword was listed as 4 jin. The actual consumption was 3.5, a difference of half a jin per sword. With 1,000 swords, that's 500 jin of meteorite steel, a huge sum. Someone in the relation was either mistaken or stealing. Cain said this out loud, without thinking, simply because the engineer inside him couldn't ignore a mistake in the calculations. Sun Yihe stopped. She turned around. She looked at the clay blacksmith who had just pointed out an error in the Sun Dynasty's documents to the dynasty head's daughter. Any other blacksmith would have expected a blow after that, or worse. But she didn't strike him. She asked how he knew the actual consumption. Cain explained, briefly. 3.5 jin is the optimum with his forging method. With the traditional method, it's 4. The difference lies in losses from scale and carbon. His method reduces losses because it cuts down on the number of heating cycles. Sun Yihe was silent for 10 seconds. Then she sat down on a bench by the wall. She placed the scroll on her lap and began asking questions, not about swords, about production costs, how much a single capsule costs. No, she didn't know what a capsule was. How much a single sword costs, the entire cycle, from ore to finished blade, including coal, including labor costs, including tool wear and tear. Cain answered, number by number. He knew every one because he had calculated them, because an engineer always calculates production costs. It's the foundation of any manufacturing process. Sun Yihe listened. She took notes. And with every passing minute, her expression changed. The box opened slightly. First came surprise, then interest, then something resembling hunger. The same hunger Cain had seen in Liane when she looked at the blueprints. The hunger of a person who had met, for the first time, someone who spoke their language. They talked for 2 hours. Sun Yihe was late for 3 meetings. Her bodyguard was getting nervous at the gate.
Master Zhao watched from the guest room window. Torvin silently refilled the tea. When she was leaving, Cain asked if he could send her a note with calculations on optimizing steel consumption. She said he could, and that the note should be delivered through her servant Yun, who goes to the lower city market once a week. Cain understood. She had given him a secret channel of communication. The daughter of the head of the dynasty had given a clay smith a way to contact her outside official channels. The first note contained only numbers: steel consumption, process optimization, savings, boring stuff. The second one had numbers too, but different ones. The cost of gunpowder, hypothetical, disguised as a cost calculation for a new hardening compound. Sun Yihe replied 2 days later. Her reply contained not only a verification of his numbers, but also an alternative calculation.
Taking into account wholesale prices for saltpeter, taking into account seasonal fluctuations, taking into account transportation costs from 3 different provinces. Cain read her note and realized he had found more than just an ally. He had found a second brain, a brain that thinks not like an engineer, but like an economist, one that sees not a blueprint, but a system, not a detail, but a supply chain. The third note was more candid. Cain wrote that he was working on a project that could shift the balance of power in the dynasty. He didn't describe the project. He didn't give details. He simply said he needed someone who could calculate at the treasury level and who could be trusted. Sun Yihe replied with a single line. Come to the terrace of the residence 3 days after sunset. Tell the guards you've brought steel samples for Lady Forth. Cain arrived, with 2 steel ingots in his hands. The guards let him through. Sun Yihe was waiting for him on the terrace in a simple dark dress without jewelry, without guards, without a maid. She said she had read all 3 notes, and that she understood more between the lines than he had written. She said she was 18, and that in a year her father would marry her off to the Lian dynasty to their head's 3rd son. A political alliance. She would be a hostage in a foreign house for the rest of her life. She said this was the first time anyone had asked her opinion, not about marriage, about anything at all. Cain was silent. He listened. Sun Yihe looked him in the eyes and asked what he was building. Cain told the truth, not all of it, but enough. He said he was building a weapon that didn't require chi, one that could kill a cultivator, one that could grant power to those without a spiritual root. Sun Yihe was silent for a long time. The wind ruffled her hair. Far below, the lights of the lower city glowed. Then she said that if it were true, he was either a savior or a madman, and that she was interested either way. Cain asked if she could help for supplies, while remaining within the dynasty, secretly. Sun Yihe smiled, for the first time all evening, a small smile, a quick one. And she said that secrets were the only thing she had been taught in this house. The 6th month. Everything had accelerated. Sun Yihe worked quietly and quickly. A week after their meeting on the terrace, Cain received a complete inventory of saltpeter stocks in all provinces of the Song dynasty. 2 weeks later, a map of caravan routes with patrol schedules. 3 weeks later, a diagram of the warehouses in the lower city, indicating which ones were inspected once a month and which ones had been neglected for 2 years. She didn't ask why he needed it. She did the math. Cain handed the diagram to Hannah. Hannah looked at it, she whistled, and said that if she'd had this data 5 years ago, she'd already own half the trade routes along the southern coast. The supply route had changed. Now, Hannah didn't transport the reagents openly through the market. She used forgotten warehouses as transshipment points. Baskets of saltpeter stood among old sacks of grain, bottles of acid behind boxes of mails, lead ingots under a mat in a corner where no one had looked for 2 years. The volume had tripled. Cain could now produce 50 rounds a week instead of 10. Master Zhao was still living in Pharaoh's house. 2 months. His reports were sent to the dynasty's capital every 10 days. Cain knew this because Sun Yihe intercepted copies. The reports were alarming. Master Zhao wrote that the young pharaoh was demonstrating inexplicable knowledge of metallurgy,
that the quality of the swords had improved for no apparent reason, that the blacksmith was secretive and worked at night, that increased surveillance was recommended. Cain read the copy and realized that time was running out. Master Zhao was no fool. Sooner or later, he would find something. Cain began preparing a second layer of defense, a diversion. He ostentatiously set up a second forge in the smithy, a smaller one for experiments with alloys, officially out in the open. Master Zhao could come and watch whenever he wanted. In front of him, Cain melted steel with various additives. He varied the carbon ratios. He experimented with chromium, which was scarce here but which alchemists sold under the name red earth, manganese, tungsten. Every experiment was documented. Every result was recorded on a small tablet. Master Zhao watched and nodded. He took notes. He sent them to the capital. Young Pharaoh is experimenting with new alloys for swords. Talented, ambitious, safe for now. For now. That phrase appeared in every report. Cain saw it, and he sped up. The 7th month. There were already 4 people on the team. Cain, Lian, Hannah with her caravan, Sun Yi He within the dynasty. A 5th was missing, someone who could shoot. Mei Li Zheng appeared in the lower city at the beginning of the 7th month. Cain learned about her from Hannah, a former student of the Sun Martial Arts School, expelled, officially for disrespect, in reality for refusing to sleep with the senior instructor. Tall, muscular, she moved in a way that made Cain immediately recognize a trained body. Body forging stage, 3rd level, weak spiritual root, ceiling. To the Sun Swordsman, she was cannon fodder. If only they knew what cannons were here. She shot a bow. Hannah said she saw Mei Li hit a coin from 80 paces on a dare, 3 times out of 3. Cain came to watch, the lower city, the training ground behind the Red Phoenix Tavern. Mei Li stood with her bow and moved between the targets, quickly, accurately, arrow after arrow, each one in the center. Cain counted, 12 arrows a minute, all within a circle the size of a fist, 60 paces away. He approached after her practice, introduced himself, a blacksmith from the Pharaoh clan. Mei Li looked at him without interest. Blacksmiths were to her what cultivators were to others, servants, useful but unremarkable. Cain asked if she had ever been to the mountains west of the Black Vein. Mei Li said no. Cain said there was something interesting for someone with her skills. Mei Li asked what exactly. Cain said a weapon, not a sword, not a bow, something new. Mei Li smirked. She said that new weapons were invented every year, and every year they turned out to be worse than the good old sword. Cain said that this weapon could pierce armor from 100 paces away. Mei Li stopped smirking. She looked at him intently. At 100 paces, the armor of a chi condensation stage cultivator can withstand any arrow, even a spiritual one. Only a swordsman of equal or higher rank can pierce it. She asked if he was joking. Cain said he wasn't joking and that he was ready to demonstrate. Mei Li thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, she came to the smithy. Cain led her into the tunnel. He showed her the rifle. He let her hold it. Mei Li took the weapon in her hands and froze. The hands of a marksman. She felt the balance. She felt the weight. She felt that it was made to aim and fire, like a bow, but different. Cain set up a target 100 paces away. He loaded it. He showed her how to aim. He showed her how to pull the trigger, smoothly, as she exhaled, without jerking. Mei Li raised the rifle. She took aim. Cain watched her stance. The bow had instilled perfect habits, straight back, steady grip, even breathing. She pulled the trigger. A thunderous roar. The recoil threw her a step backward. She hadn't expected it. Smoke filled the tunnel. When it cleared, Mei Li stood with the rifle at her hip and looked at the target. The bullet hit the right edge, a palm's width from the center. The first shot of her life. Cain reloaded, handed it back. Mei Li raised it. This time she pressed the stock against her shoulder tighter. She took her time aiming. She pulled the trigger. Bullseye. Cain looked at her.
She stood there staring at the target. Her face was blank. Her hands weren't shaking. Then she turned to Cain and asked quietly, "At what range will this penetrate the golden core's shield?" Cain said he didn't know yet, that they'd have to test it, that they'd need a heavier, harder bullet, a more powerful charge, and a longer barrel, that it would take time. Mei Li placed the rifle on the workbench, carefully, the way you put down something that has already become a part of you. And she said she had time, that she had nowhere else to go, that the school had expelled her, the dynasty had forgotten her, the world had written her off. What if this thing can do what he says? Then she wants to be the first to use it. Cain held out his hand to her. Mei Li looked at it. A claysmith holding out his hand to a former martial arts school student. That doesn't happen in this world. She shook it. The 8th month. Torvin found the shell casing. Cain didn't realize it right away. In the morning, he went down to the basement to check the hiding place out of habit, even though he hadn't stored anything important there for 2 months. A single paper cartridge remained in the crack between the stones. Used, charred. Cain had forgotten to remove it. The crack was empty. The cartridge was gone. Cain went upstairs. Torvin stood at the forge, shaping the workpiece. A typical morning, the usual rhythm of the hammer. His father didn't turn around, didn't look up. But Cain could see that his shoulders would tense in a different way, slightly higher, slightly stiffer. That was how Torvin stood when he was holding something back inside. Cain walked past him, took the hammer, stood at the anvil, began to work. They forged side by side all day, in silence, as always. But the silence was different. Between the hammer blows, something heavy and immovable lay within it, like a stone at the bottom of a river. In the evening, Master Zhao went to the lower city for supplies. Torvin and Cain were left alone, for the first time in 2 months. Torvin sat down on a bench by the wall. He wiped his hands with a rag. He looked at his son and placed a cartridge case on the workbench. A scorched paper tube with traces of gunpowder soot inside. Cain looked at the cartridge case, then at his father. Torvin said he'd found it yesterday, that he hadn't slept all night, that he knew the smell of sulfur and saltpeter and understood this wasn't a tempering mixture, that he wanted to know what his son was doing in the basement at night. Cain was silent. For 10 years he had been silent in this house. For 10 years he had hidden a whole life inside himself, a whole world, a whole body of knowledge. And here was his father, the man who taught him how to hold a hammer, who bowed to the cultivators every day and stood at the forge every day, who didn't cry when his wife died. This man sat before him and waited for an answer. Cain sat down across from him. He picked up the cartridge case from the table, turned it over in his fingers, and began to speak. Not everything. He couldn't talk about his past life. Not now. Maybe never. But he talked about the shell casing, about the gunpowder, about the bullet, about the barrel, about how a small piece of metal can fly faster than sound and pierce armor, about how you don't need chi for that. You don't need a spiritual root. You only need hands and knowledge. Torvin listened. His face was impassive, stone-like. Only his eyes were alive, attentive. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. He listened until the end. When Cain fell silent, Torvin stood up. He walked across the smithy, stopped by the wall where the tools hung. He stood with his back to his son, for a minute, 2, 3. Then he said Cain needed to follow him. Now. They left the smithy. Torvin walked ahead, silently, quickly, across the yard, through the back gate, to the old shed where firewood and broken tools were stored. In the corner of the shed, under a pile of old hides, lay a chest. Cain had seen it before, as a child. He'd asked what was inside. Torvin had replied that they were his great-grandfather's old things. Don't touch it. Now Torvin pushed the hides aside. He took a key from his belt. He unlocked the chest. He lifted the lid. Inside lay 3 items. The first, a bundle of yellow paper tied with string.
The second, an iron tube as long as an elbow, rusty, with a bell-shaped end on one side. The third, a thin book with a leather cover, very old. Torvin took out the bundle, untied the string, unfolded it. Blueprints, rough, drawn with a trembling hand. But Cain recognized them instantly. The iron tube, a firing hole on the side, a powder chamber, a fuse gun. Primitive, 300 years old, drawn by a man who understood the principle but lacked the resources to bring it to life. Cain took the tube in his hands, turned it over. The iron was rusted through. Inside the barrel, not a trace of rifling, a smooth bore.
Primitive, but it was a barrel, a real firearm barrel, made 300 years ago. Torvin said it was the legacy of Master Orlin Pharaoh, the clan's founder, the one who led the family to the southern foothills 300 years ago, the one whom the Tang dynasty had burned at the stake before that, along with his 3 sons, for heresy, for creating a device that kills without chi. Cain listened. His heart beat steadily, but his hands gripped the rusty barrel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Torvin continued. Orlin Pharaoh built this device. He showed it to someone, or someone saw it. The Tang dynasty, which ruled the southern foothills 300 years ago, ordered everything destroyed. Orlin was burned at the stake, his 3 eldest sons along with him. The 4th son survived because he was a child and they took pity on him, or they forgot. This 4th son became the founder of the current Pharaoh clan. The chest was passed down from father to eldest son, with one condition. Never repeat what Orlin did. Never build it again. Cain looked at his father. Torvin stood and looked at his son. There was no fear in his eyes. There was a question. You knew? Cain shook his head. No. He didn't know. But now he knew something more important. He wasn't the first.
Orlin Pharaoh had realized it too. He had built it as well. He had tried too, and he had been destroyed. Cain picked up the leather-bound book. He opened it. The pages were yellowed, fragile. The text was written in small handwriting, letters. Cain read 3 lines, and the world stopped. Latin. Letters that didn't exist in Jinghai, that shouldn't exist. Letters that Cain knew because he had written with them for 40 years in another life. The text was a mixture of languages, Old English, Latin, fragments of phrases. He deciphered the first line. I died in the flames and woke up by the horn. Cain closed the book. His hands finally trembled. Orlin Pharaoh was not from here, just like Cain. 300 years ago, another man from another world woke up in a boy's body by the horn. He understood the same thing. He built the same thing. And he was burned. Cain looked at his father. Torvin looked at him silently, and in his gaze, Cain saw that his father understood everything. Not about a past life, not about the Latin alphabet, but about the essence, about the fact that his son is following Orlin's path,
and about the fact that this path ends in fire. Torvin said he'd found the shell casing yesterday, that he hadn't slept, that he'd wanted to throw it away, that he'd wanted to forget, that he'd wanted his son to never know about the chest. And then he remembered his wife. He remembered kneeling before the healer and how the healer hadn't looked down, and instead of throwing the shell away, he put it back and took out the key. Cain stood up. He walked over to his father. Torvin was a head taller, twice as broad. His hands were scarred, his eyes were tired. A father who had bowed for 30 years and remained silent for 30 years. Cain said he had something Orlin didn't have. Knowledge. Real, complete. Not guesswork, not intuition. Blueprints, formulas, calculations. And people who help. Torvin was silent. Then he reached out and placed his hand on his son's shoulder, heavy, hot, and said one word. Show me. Cain took him to the tunnel that very night,
showed him the workshop, the workbench, the tools, the supplies, cartridges, the rifle. Torvin walked slowly through the tunnel. He touched every object. He picked up the rifle, turned it over, examined the barrel, peered inside.
Saw the rifling. He froze. Then he asked how his son had made those spirals inside the barrel. Kane explained. A rifling tool, a steel rod with protrusions, 27 passes. Torvin listened. A minute later, he asked a question. Why exactly 6 grooves and not 4? Kane answered. 6 provide better stabilization for this caliber. 4 is enough for a smaller one. 8 is excessive and increases friction. Torvin nodded. He thought. He asked if it was possible to change the direction of the spiral so that the bullet would spin the other way, and if so, what would that change? Kane looked at his father. The question was so well informed that in his past life he had only heard it from colleagues with 10 years of experience. 10 years of silence did not mean 10 years without thought. Torvin Farrow was a master, and the master had just joined the project. The 9th month. The team had grown to 6 people: Kane, Leanne, Mei Li, Hana, Sun Yi from afar, and now Torvin. The 6th was Ethan Rain. Kane had met her in the alchemist's shop where he went for copper sulfate, a redhead, freckled, with a face that in Jinghai looked like an artist's mistake. Half-blood. Father a Western merchant, mother local, both dead. Raised in a temple orphanage, 17 years old. Quiet to the point of transparency. She stood behind the counter sorting powders. Kane named what he needed. She retrieved it without a single superfluous movement, wrapped it up, counted it, named the price. Kane paid and had already turned toward the exit when she said that if he needed copper sulfate of such purity, standard tempering had nothing to do with it. Kane stopped, looked at her. She looked back without defiance and without fear, calmly, the way a person looks who is used to being inconspicuous and therefore has nothing to lose. She added that she'd been working with reagents for 4 years and knew what each one was used for, and that copper sulfate of such purity was needed for only one thing, for distilling acid. Kane was silent. His heart beat once harder than usual, then steadily. He asked how she knew that. Ethan replied that she reads. Everything. Every scroll in the shop, every treatise on alchemy that the owner keeps on the top shelves, thinking no one touches them. She's read them all, and memorized half of them. Kane said she has a good memory. Ethan said she had nothing but her memory. No family, no home, no place. Only what she had read and memorized. That was all she had. Kane came to the shop every week. He bought reagents. He talked, briefly, cautiously. Ethan was smart, not like Leanne with her photographic memory, not like Sun Yi-hei with her systematic thinking, in a different way. She saw connections between things that at first glance were unrelated. Kane mentioned that he worked with sulfur, and 3 days later she brought him a scroll describing a sulfur deposit in the southern swamps that no one in the lower city knew about. Because the scroll lay on the top shelf and was written in a Western dialect that no one but her could read. She knew 3 languages, the local dialect, Western trade, and the old temple language used in ancient texts. 3 languages and 4 years of reading. For Kane, it was gold. Once he slipped up. He used a word that didn't exist in the local dialect, a technical term from a past life. Pressure per square centimeter. He said it automatically, corrected himself, converted it to local units. But Ethan heard it. And a week later, as she was wrapping up a package of sulfur, she told him quietly that he sometimes spoke as if from books about the Western lands. Kane stopped. He looked at her. She looked back. Without accusation, without curiosity, with something else. With recognition. She wasn't from here either. Not in the sense that she was from another world, in the sense that she didn't belong anywhere. A redhead in a world of black hair, with a face that didn't fit in, with a language they don't know here, with books in her head that no one here has read. Kane made a decision.
He came to the shop after closing time. He asked Ethan to stay. He sat down across from her behind the counter, and he told her. Not everything, but more than he'd ever told anyone else. He told her that he wasn't quite who he pretended to be, that he possessed knowledge that didn't exist in this world, that this knowledge allows him to do things that will change the order of things. Ethan listened. She didn't interrupt. When he fell silent, she asked only one thing. Why had he told her? Cain said he needed someone to write things down. Formulas, blueprints, calculations, everything he keeps in his head.
Because if anything happens to him, it will all die with him, just as it died with Orlin 300 years ago. He needs an archivist, a keeper of knowledge, someone with a perfect memory and 3 languages who could record and hide it, and pass it on if necessary. Ethan was silent for a long time. Then she said that for the first time in her life, someone had asked her to be herself, not to be quiet, not to be invisible, to be who she is, a person who remembers everything. She agreed. That very night, Cain began dictating. Ethan wrote, in the local dialect, simultaneously in Western trade. Gunpowder formulas, barrel steel composition, rifling principles, ballistic tables, bore design. Cain dictated for hours. Ethan wrote without stopping, not a single mistake, not a single question, just a pen on paper, a quiet scratch in the silence of the tunnel. In 2 weeks, they filled 4 notebooks. Cain proofread them. Everything was correct, down to the last digit. Ethan hid the notebooks in a secret place known only to her and Cain. Not in the tunnel, not in the smithy, in the temple where she grew up, under the altar, in a crevice she'd found when she was 8 and where she'd hidden her books from the abbot. The 9th month was drawing to a close. Cain stood in the tunnel and looked at his team. Torvin was at the workbench, shaping the blank for a new barrel. Lien was sorting cartridges by weight. Mei Li was taking apart and reassembling a rifle with her eyes closed. She did this every evening, over and over, until her hands had memorized every screw, every spring, every gap. Hannah wasn't here. Hannah was on the road with the caravan, but her baskets of reagents stood in the corner, a fresh shipment. Sun Yihei wasn't here, but her note was in Cain's pocket, new data on patrol routes for the coming month. Ethan sat in the corner, rewriting yesterday's notes in fair copy. 6 people, 4 women and 2 men. None of them, except for Mei Li, had even a faint spiritual root. Against a world where people fly on swords and tear down mountains with their fists. Cain looked at the rifle on the workbench, then at the rack of ammunition. 52 rounds, 2 barrels, 1 pistol, 1 rifle. That wasn't enough. But in 6 months, there would be more. In a year, even more. And in 2 years. Cain didn't plan 2 years ahead. An engineer plans in stages. The next stage. 10 barrels, 100 rounds, 3 shooters, a place for a shooting range where he could train without fear of being overheard, and a solution to the problem of Master Zhao. Because Master Zhao wouldn't leave on his own, and his reports were growing increasingly alarming. Time was running out. Cain sensed it the way an engineer senses tension in metal just before it breaks. No cracks were visible yet, but it's already there, inside. The 10th month. A caravan carrying ore was traveling along a mountain road between 2 passes. 6 wagons, 20 miners under guard. Ore for the Pharaoh Forge. A month's supply of meteorite steel. The bandits struck at dawn. 30 men. Former soldiers, deserters from the Beifang army, for whom the war hasn't started yet, but there's already nothing left to eat. They emerged from behind the rocks on both sides of the road. Swords, spears, 3 crossbows. The miners had pickaxes and sticks. Not a fight, a slaughter. Cain found out about it an hour before the attack. Hannah sent a messenger. Her scouts spotted the bandits at the pass last night. They counted the heads, 30. Moderately armed, no cultivators among them. Ordinary people, angry and hungry. Cain made his decision in 10 seconds. He took Mei Li with him.
4 rifles, 40 rounds, and 2 miners whom he'd taught over the past 2 months how to load and shoot. Not accurately, just in the general direction of the target. That would be enough. They set out for the pass under cover of darkness. They took up a position on the ridge above the road, 200 paces to the ambush site. Elevation, cover behind rocks, no wind. Kane looked through the spyglass that Hana had brought from the coast. The lenses were cloudy, but it was enough for 200 paces. The bandits were lying behind boulders, waiting for the caravan. They weren't really hiding. Why hide from the miners? The caravan appeared from the east, slow wagons, tired oxen. The miners walked on either side, pickaxes on their shoulders. The bandits began to move forward. Kane gave the order. Mei Li fired first. 200 paces. The bullet hit the bandit leader in the chest. He fell and didn't get up. The roar of the shot echoed through the gorge. The echo bounced from wall to wall. The bandits froze. They didn't understand what had happened. Their leader had fallen. No arrow, no blow. He just fell. Kane fired a second shot. He missed. He corrected his aim. The third shot hit a bandit in the shoulder. He spun around and fell. Mei Li fired steadily, once every 5 seconds. Reload. Aim. Fire. Every bullet hit its mark. 2 miners fired wide, but the sound did the trick. 4 shots simultaneously from different points along the ridge. For the bandits below, it was hell. Invisible death rained down from the sky. No arrows, no spells. With a roar they had never heard before. 3 minutes later, 7 lay on the ground. The rest ran. They dropped their swords. They dropped their crossbows. They dropped everything. Kane didn't chase after them, not because he felt sorry for them, because ammunition is more valuable than corpses. They went down to the caravan. The miners stood and watched them. 4 men with long iron poles on their shoulders. At the bodies of the bandits on the road. At the holes in the leather jackets that neither arrow nor sword could make. The senior miner approached Kane. He asked what it was. Kane said it was a new tool. The miner looked at the rifle, then at Kane, then at Mei Li, who stood calmly and slung the rifle strap over her shoulder as if she'd been doing it every day her whole life. The miner said that if this tool could be obtained, he had 10 men who'd want to learn how to use it. Kane nodded. The rumor spread, quietly, underground, like water through cracks in stone. Pharaoh has something new, some kind of alchemy. The bandits were killed in 3 minutes. No swords, no chi. 4 men against 30. Kane knew the rumor would reach Master Zhao. He knew it would reach the Song dynasty. He knew that the time he'd bought with months of silence and caution had just been drastically cut short. But the caravan was intact. The ore was intact. The people were alive. And 10 miners wanted to learn how to shoot. It was worth the risk. The 11th month. The workshop in the tunnel had expanded. 3 workbenches, 2 furnaces, a warehouse of ammunition, a separate room for Ethan and her notebooks. Kane had divided production into operations, just like in a factory. Torvin forged the barrels. No one could do it better. His hands felt the metal in a way Kane would never learn. Each barrel came out smoother than the last. Leanne loaded the cartridges, quickly and precisely, 20 an hour. 2 miners whom Kane had recruited after the attack on the caravan made stocks and forends from mountain ash. Mei Li trained the shooters every evening. In the far tunnel were the sound in the rock, 5 people, then 8, then 12. Women and men, rootless, those who had been written off, those whom the world called clay. Mei Li drove them without mercy. Stance, grip, breathing, aiming, trigger pull. Again, again, again. She didn't yell, she didn't curse, she just showed them. And everyone who saw her shoot understood it was better to obey. By the end of the 11th month, Kane had 10 barrels, 8 rifles and 2 pistols, 200 rounds in reserve, 12 shooters, 3 of whom were already shooting decently. Not masterfully, decently. They could hit a silhouette at 100 paces, every other shot at 200, only melee at 300. But it was a start. A year and 2 months. Master Zhao had come to kill. Cain knew it by his eyes, not by his words, not by his gestures, by the eyes from which all pretense had vanished. For 4 months, Master Zhao had worn the mask of a friendly inspector.
He drank tea, he asked questions, he took notes. And now the mask had fallen, because yesterday his latest report had returned from the capital with a note. The red seal of Sun Zihao, the second son of the head of the dynasty. The note said one thing: clean up. Sun Yiha intercepted a copy of the order 2 hours before it reached Master Zhao. She sent a messenger, a single word on a scrap of paper. Today. Cain was ready, not because he had foreseen a specific day, because he had been preparing every day. A pistol in his belt under his apron, loaded, cocked. Ever since Master Zhao had moved into the house, Cain had worn it without taking it off. Evening. The smithy. Torvin was working at the far forge, his back to the door. Master Zhao entered, quietly, like a cultivator enters when he doesn't want to be heard. Qi condensation stage. He could kill Torvin with a single palm strike to the back of the head, and he intended to. First the father, then the son, then anyone who saw too much. Clean, quiet. To report that the Pharaoh clan had engaged in demonic practices and was destroyed while resisting. Cain stood in the basement doorway. Master Zhao didn't see him. He was looking at Torvin's back. His hand began to glow, a pale blue glow of qi around his fingers, the shattering palm technique. Cain stepped out of the darkness, a pistol in his outstretched hand. 5 steps to Master Zhao. He spoke a single sentence. "I've been waiting for this year." "Hello." Master Zhao turned, quickly, a cultivator's reflexes. His eyes found Cain, then they found the object in his hand. He didn't recognize it. He'd never seen anything like it. But his instinct kicked in. He realized it was a weapon. His qi-infused hand shot forward, toward Cain's throat. 5 steps for a qi condensation cultivator is half a second. Cain pulled the trigger. The roar in the enclosed space of the smithy was monstrous. The bullet entered Master Zhao's chest, 10 millimeters of lead and steel at a speed of 300 meters per second. Condensation qi's protective barrier isn't designed for this. It's designed for swords, for arrows, for punches, for anything that moves slower than a bullet. Master Zhao flew 2 steps backward. His back slammed into the anvil. He slid to the floor. His qi-infused hand went limp. His eyes were open, surprised. He didn't understand what had killed him. Torvin turned around, hammer in his hands. His face was white. He had seen everything. He saw Master Zhao walking toward him with his glowing hand. He saw his son emerge from the darkness. He heard the sound. He saw the result. Cain stood with the pistol in his lowered hand. Smoke rose from the barrel, the smell of gunpowder and blood. He looked at his father. Torvin looked at him. No one said a word. Then Lian ran in through the side entrance with a rifle. She had been in the tunnel when she heard the shot. She ran 3 miles in 5 minutes. She saw the body. She saw Cain. She lowered her rifle. Cain said the body had to be disposed of. Now. Torvin nodded. They wrapped it in a burlap sack. That night, Hannah and 2 of her men took the body to an abandoned mine shaft. Deep, dark, a mine that hadn't been opened in 100 years. Master Zhao had vanished. He had stopped communicating with the Song dynasty. 10 days later, the report hadn't arrived. In 20 days, they'd start searching. Cain knew he had a month, maybe 2, before Sun Zihao sent someone more serious. He gathered his team in the tunnel, all 6 of them.
Plus 12 marksmen, plus Han and her 3 people. 22 people. Cain stood before them and said that the game of hide-and-seek was over, that the Song dynasty was coming. Not tomorrow, but they would come. And when they did, they had to be ready, not for battle, for disappearance. The plan was simple. Evacuate the forge, move everything of value into the tunnels, equipment, supplies, steel, ammo, everything. The tunnels would become a base, not a temporary one, a permanent one. Kane showed the map that he and Leanne had drawn up over the past month. A network of tunnels, 12 kilometers in total, 3 exits to the surface, 2 water wells, natural ventilation. You can live here, you can work here, and you can defend yourselves here. Torvin looked at the map and shook his head, not in disagreement, at the scale of it. In 10 months, his son had turned an abandoned mine into a fortress. Mei Li looked at the map and calculated positions for the shooters. Hana counted the food supplies. Leanne memorized every turn, every corridor, every crevice. Ethan took notes. Sun Yi wasn't there, but her note lay on the table. She wrote that Sun Zihao was sending a search party in 3 weeks, 20 cultivators, a commander at the Golden Core stage. They had 3 weeks, 1 year and 4 months. Sun's search party arrived on the 16th day, earlier than expected. 22 cultivators, not 20, Commander Liu Bao, Golden Core stage, a serious fighter. Kane had learned this from Sun Yi 2 days before their arrival. It was enough time to prepare. Pharaoh's forge stood empty, a cold furnace, empty shelves, trash on the floor, signs of a hasty retreat. Exactly what Liu Bao needed to see. Exactly what would make him think the Pharaoh clan had fled in panic. Liu Bao inspected the forge, searched the house, found the basement, found a crack in the foundation, empty. Found tracks leading to the western mountains, fresh, obvious, too obvious. Liu Bao was no fool. But he was a cultivator, and cultivators think in terms of power. If the enemy runs, it means he is weak. If he is weak, it means he must be caught and destroyed. Simple, clear, as it always was. He led the group along the trail, into the mountains, toward the pass, along the path that Kane had laid out specifically. The path led to a narrow gorge, 300 paces long, 15 wide, vertical walls, rock. 1 entrance, 1 exit. The Red Ridge Gorge. Kane stood on the ridge to the right. Mei Li was beside him. On the ridge to the left were Torvin and 4 archers. Down below, at the gorge's exit, was Leanne with 3 archers. Hana and her men were blocking the entrance. 22 cultivators entered the gorge, stretching out in a column. Liu Bao was in front, confident, swift. The golden core glowed in his chest like a small sun. Kane saw it through his spyglass. The glow of chi was visible to the naked eye. At this level, a cultivator could raise a shield capable of stopping a sword, stopping an arrow, stopping a blow from another cultivator of equal rank. Could he stop a bullet? Kane didn't know. Theoretically, the golden core shield reacts to a threat. The swordsman swings, the shield activates, the arrow flies, the shield activates. But the shield activates in response to what the cultivator perceives as a threat, to what he sees or feels. A bullet travels faster than sound. The cultivator will hear the shot after the bullet hits, if it hits. The question is whether the golden core perceives the bullet as a threat or not. Today they'll find out. Kane gave the signal. Mei Li fired first, 300 paces, down. At the last cultivator in the column, the bullet hit the neck. The cultivator fell without a sound. Body laying stage. No shield, just flesh and bone. The roar of the shot filled the gorge. The echo struck 100-fold. The cultivators reacted instantly, swords from their sheaths, shields flashed up in the hands of those who could. Reflexes. They were preparing for an attack by swordsmen, for an ambush by archers, for something they knew and understood. They were not prepared for what rained down from above. 12 barrels opened simultaneously from both sides of the ridge, from 2 heights. Crossfire in a stone corridor 15 paces wide. Kane fired and counted. 4 on body lock fell within the first 10 seconds. No chance. A bullet is faster than their reflexes. 8 on chi condensation held out longer. Their shield stopped the first bullet, sometimes the second, but not the third. Not when you're being shot at from 2 sides at once and you don't know where the next one is coming from. The chi shield demanded concentration, focus. The cultivator could close in from the front, or from behind, or from above, but not from all sides at once. 4 at the condensation stage tried to take off. They leaped onto the gorge walls, ran up the rock, chi in their legs. The light step technique. Mei Li took out the first one halfway to the ridge, 100 paces, at a moving target on the run up a vertical wall with a single shot. Torvin took out the second one from 30 paces with a pistol. When the cultivator swung over the edge of the ridge and found itself 5 paces away from him, Torvin fired point blank. The cultivator flew backward and fell into the gorge, 30 meters down. The 2 remaining on the wall turned back, jumped down, got caught in crossfire. 2 minutes later, 3 stood in the ravine. Liu Bao and his 2 deputies, all on the golden core. 19 bodies around them. Liu Bao was unharmed. Not a single bullet had touched him. The golden core shield glowed around him with an even golden light. He could see where the shots were coming from. He saw flashes. He saw smoke. He could have jumped onto the ridge in half a second and killed the shooters with his bare hands. But he didn't move. He stood and looked at the dead bodies around him.
His men. 19 cultivators, killed in 2 minutes. By something he couldn't understand. Cain stood at the edge of the ridge, standing tall, exposed, a pistol in his hand. Useless against the golden core. He knew that. Liu Bao knew it too. Cain shouted down, said that Liu Bao had a choice, to leave, report what he'd seen, or stay and see how long the golden core's shield would hold up when fired upon continuously. Liu Bao looked up, then at the bodies around him, then at his 2 deputies standing nearby, also looking up, at the ridges from which the barrels protruded. He said he would leave, but he would return, with an army. Cain nodded. He said he'd wait. The 3 golden core cultivators left, through the gorge, over the pass, eastward, toward the capital of the Song dynasty, with news that would change everything. Cain sat on the ridge, his legs dangled into the void. Mei Li sat down beside him, silently. Lien climbed up from below. She stood behind him. Torvin remained at his post, checking the rifles, counting the remaining rounds. Cain looked down at the gorge below. The smoke hadn't cleared yet, the smell of gunpowder and blood. 19 bodies. The first real battle, the first real victory, and the first wake-up call for a world that hadn't yet realized the Age of Swords was ending. 1 year and 8 months. 8 months after the gorge. The world found out. Not right away, not everyone, but enough. Liu Bao reported to Sun Zihao. Zihao reported to his father. The head of the Song dynasty, Zhang He, remained silent in his chambers for 3 days. Then he summoned the Council of Elders, behind closed doors. 19 cultivators were killed by a weapon without chi. This statement was repeated in every report, and each time it sounded like nonsense. The dynasty was divided. Some believed it was a demonic heresy and must be burned to the ground. Others believed it was a new weapon and must be seized. Still others did not believe it at all. Sun Zihao belonged to the first group. Burn it down, immediately. He requested 200 cultivators from his father for a punitive expedition. The head refused, not out of kindness, out of calculation. 200 cultivators represented a third of the dynasty's combat power. Beifeng in the north was just waiting for the Sun dynasty to weaken. But the head authorized 50 for a reconnaissance in force. We'll decide later. Sun Yihei relayed everything to Cain. Every word, every number, every name. She was taking a risk every single day. Yoon, the maid who carried the notes, started to get nervous. Too much paper, too often. Sun Yihei calmed her down, gave her money, then realized that money wouldn't help and switched the channel.
Now the notes went through a kitchen messenger boy whom Hannah had recruited for a silver ingot a month. Kane was preparing. The past 8 months had not been in vain. The team had grown. 60 people, 40 marksmen, 10 apprentices in the workshop, 10 servants. All rootless, all cast-offs, cripples, widows, orphans, those whom the world called clay. To Kane, they were fighters. The arsenal had grown proportionally. 30 rifles, 10 pistols, 1,200 rounds, and something new. Mei Li stood before Kane and looked at the object in his hands. A long rifle with a thickened barrel and a wooden cheek rest. A sighting rail with 2 movable elements, adjustable. Kane explained, "This isn't an ordinary rifle. It's for her. The stock is shaved down 3 millimeters on the right to fit her shoulder. The cheek piece is shaped to fit her cheekbone.
The trigger is adjusted for her finger. The trigger pull is exactly how she likes it. She tried it, she raised it, braced it against her cheek, took aim, lowered it, raised it again." Mei Li didn't say anything. She just held the rifle and breathed. Then she said quietly that no one in her life had ever done anything so precise for her. Kane replied that the tool should fit the hand, not the hand to the tool. Mei Li looked at him for a long time. Then she said he was a fool because it wasn't a tool. It was his way of speaking, and she could hear it. Kane didn't know what to say. Mei Li took the rifle and went off to practice. The next day, she hit the target from 600 paces, 3 out of 5, with the new rifle. 600 paces is the distance at which Elder Hay feels safe, at which he removes his protective shield and stands exposed. Because at 600 paces, nothing in this world kills. Not yet. Kane set a date. In 2 months, a clear morning. Every morning, Elder Ha goes out onto the terrace of the Eastern Tower. He meditates without his shield. A habit. 20 years of the same routine. Sun Yihei confirmed the schedule. Mei Li trained every day. 600 paces, then 700, then 600 again, until it became second nature, until perfection. Go and 10 months. A clear morning. The mountain range east of Elder He's residence. Mei Li lay behind a rock, her rifle propped in a crevice. Kane was next to the spotting scope. 320 paces to the terrace, not 600. Closer. Because Kane had recalculated and decided that reliability was more important than safety. Wind from the left, 3. Kane calculated the adjustment. Air temperature, altitude, density, all in his head. Everything was precise. He dictated to Mei Li. Aim 1.5 notches higher. Wind from the left, 3. Mei Li adjusted her sights. Her breathing was steady. Finger on the trigger. Elder Ha stepped out onto the terrace. White robes, straight back, face turned toward the sun. Eyes closed. No shield. He had stood like that every morning for 20 years, and not once had anything threatened him on that terrace. Not once. Mei Li pulled the trigger. The sound reached the terrace a second after the bullet. Elder Ha fell, on his back, arms outstretched. The white robes began to darken at the center of his chest. He didn't have time to understand. Didn't have time to raise his shield. Didn't have time to turn. Didn't have time. Mei Li lay behind the rock and didn't move. Kane looked through the scope. The terrace, the body, a growing stain on the white fabric. The one who hadn't gone down to the blacksmith's mother because she was clay. The one who hadn't remembered the blacksmith's name for 10 years. The one whom his father had served silently and without thanks for 30 years. Mei Li quietly asked if she had hit him. Kane said she had. They left quickly, cleared the position, took the shell casing, erased the traces. An hour later they were in the tunnels. 2 hours later, all of Jinghai knew. Elder He was dead, killed by something invisible from a distance. No sword, no chi, no trace of the attacker. The world heard a sound it had never heard before, and that sound meant that nothing would ever be the same again.
Year 3, winter. Snow fell in the Black Vein Mountains on the night of the 12th day of the 12th month. By morning, the mountain passes were white. The air had become so dry and clear that Kane could see smoke from campfires 20 li away. The smoke was coming from the east. A lot of smoke.
Not one campfire, nor 10. Hundreds of lights stretching along the mountain road from the lower city to the first pass. An army, a real one. Not a search party like last time, not a reconnaissance in force. A full-fledged punitive corps of the Song dynasty. 200 cultivators were climbing the mountain road toward the tunnels. Sun Zihao led the way. In person. Soul fusion stage. The second most powerful man in the dynasty after his father. He was walking, not flying on a sword. He wasn't in a hurry. Every step measured, every movement precise. He walked and looked at the mountains ahead of him, and in his eyes was that calm, cold flame that people possess when they are absolutely certain of their own righteousness. Heresy, demonic weapons, desecration of heaven's order. He had come to burn it all down, just as the Tang dynasty had burned down Orlan 300 years ago. History was repeating itself. The circle was closing. And Zihao walked along that circle with the expression of a man fulfilling a sacred duty. Kane stood at the observation post above the entrance to the main tunnel, a spyglass in his hands. The lenses fogged up from his breath in the cold, and he wiped them with his sleeve every 30 seconds. Leanne was beside him. She was now. 3 years with Kane had changed her. Not on the outside. She was still thin and small. Coal dust still caked under her fingernails. But her eyes had changed. The eyes of a person who knows things that no one else on this continent knows. She sat with a notepad and a pencil. She wrote down everything Kane dictated. Number, formation, ranks, direction of movement, speed, distance between units, type of weapon, color of auras for those who didn't hide their chi. Every detail, every number. 200 fighters, 160 at stages ranging from body foundation to chi condensation, 30 at the golden core stage, 10 in the early stages of fusion, and 1 Sun Zihao. Kane lowered the tube. He looked at Leanne. She had finished writing and looked up, silently, waiting. He told her everything was going according to plan. She nodded. Not a trace of fear on her face, not a trace of doubt. Kane thought that this girl, who 3 years ago had been hauling coal for food, was now calmer than he was. And that thought made him feel better. Facing Zihao's army were Kane's 120 men. 60% were women and rootless people. People the world called clay. People to whom the world had left nothing but the right to die quietly and unnoticed. They had 72 rifles, 15 pistols, 3,000 rounds of ammunition, a 12-day supply of food, water from underground wells, and 3 things that hadn't been in their arsenal 2 months ago. Kane turned to Torvin. His father stood by the first of 3 machine guns, 6 barrels assembled into a block on a rotating drum, the handle on the side, the ammunition hopper on top. A Gatling gun. Or what Kane remembered as a Gatling gun from his past life. Rougher, heavier, with tolerances that would have made his former colleagues at the munitions factory shudder in horror. The gaps between the barrels and the casing were 3 times the allowable limit. The feed mechanism jammed on every 17th rotation. The stock creaked and wobbled. But it worked. It fired. It spat out a stream of lead with a density unheard of in a handgun. Torvin forged the barrels for all 3, 6 for each. 18 barrels in 3 weeks. The hands of a blacksmith who had forged swords for 30 years and didn't understand why. Now he understood, and he forged them so that when Kane inspected each barrel, he found not a single deviation beyond the tolerance, not a single one. A master is a master. It didn't matter what he was forging. Torvin stood by the machine gun and checked the feed mechanism one last time. He spun the handle idly. He counted the revolutions. He stopped at 14. He tightened the screw. He spun it again.
15, 16, 20. No jamming. He nodded to himself. He looked at his son. In his eyes, Cain saw something he had never seen in all 12 years of his life. Torvin Pharaoh was not afraid. For the first time in his life, he stood before the enemy and was not afraid. Because for the first time in his life, he held more than just humility in his hands. Mei Li was in position at the entrance to the Red Ridge Gorge, the very spot where a year ago they had wiped out Liu Bao's unit. She knew that gorge like the back of her hand. Every rock, every corner, every blind spot, every gust of wind, and how it alters a bullet's trajectory at 300 paces. A rifle lay beside her rifle.
That very one, with the stock carved to fit her shoulder and the trigger adjusted for her finger. Over a year of training, Mei Li had honed her marksmanship to a level Cain hadn't seen even in his past life. 700 paces in clear weather, 5 out of 5 on a target the size of a head. She lay behind a rock, breathing evenly, looking through the scope, waiting. Hannah had blocked the bypass trails. Her men had mined 3 passes with gunpowder charges, 40 pounds of gunpowder in clay pots lined with stones. When detonated, the stones turned into shrapnel, primitive, deadly. Hannah supervised the installation personally. She climbed the rocks in the dark. She cursed under her breath in 3 languages when the pots wouldn't sit level. Her 3 men worked silently and quickly, smugglers. They knew how to do things in the dark that others couldn't do in the light. By dawn, all the charges were in place. The fuses were laid. The detonators were ready. Ethan was deep inside the tunnel, in the far chamber 3 turns away, with 4 notebooks in a leather cover and a 5th one she had been finishing all night. If things went wrong, she would escape through the 3rd exit, the secret one. Only Cain and Leanne knew about it, and now Ethan. A narrow passage through an old ventilation shaft leading to the northern slope of the mountain. From there, down the ravine to the riverbed and across the river into lands controlled by no dynasty. The wild mountains. You can hide there. You can survive there. And there you can preserve the blueprints, the formulas, the memory. Knowledge will not die. Not this time. Not like with Orlin. Ethan understood this. She was the guardian, the last line of defense. Not from the cultivators, from oblivion. Jin Yue stood at the second entrance to the tunnel, silent, upright, a white strand in her black hair. The only cultivator in Cain's team, golden core stage. She didn't shoot. She didn't know how. She didn't want to learn. She was here for something else, a shield. If any of the Sun cultivators broke through into the tunnel, Jin Yue would meet them, delay them, for a minute, for 2. Long enough for the archers to regroup. Enough time for the wounded to be carried deeper inside. She stood there, fingering her prayer beads, quietly, calmly, as if she were waiting not for battle, but for dawn. Cain asked her if she was ready. Jing Yue looked at him and replied that 20 years ago she had been half a day late to meet a woman, and that woman had died. Today, she wouldn't be late. Cain nodded. He didn't say that he knew which woman she was talking about. He didn't say that this woman was his mother. That could wait. If they survived this day, they would have time for such conversations. Sun Yi rode toward the tunnels from the north, alone, without guards, without a maid, without a jade comb in her hair. She had fled the residence 3 days ago when she learned of the campaign. 3 days on horseback along winter roads. The daughter of the head of the dynasty, a girl who had lived a double life for 2 years. Notes, numbers, maps, secret meetings arranged through messengers. For 2 years, she had been Cain's eyes and ears within the Song dynasty and had never been caught. But when she learned that Zi Hao was leading an army toward the tunnels, she realized that notes alone would no longer suffice. For the first time in 2 years, she made a decision that could not be contained in a note. For the first time in her entire life, she made a choice that could not be undone. The battle began at dawn. The first rays of the sun had not yet crossed the eastern ridge when the Song vanguard moved through the gorge.
Kane had expected Zihao to send out scouts. Zihao did not disappoint. 50 cultivators entered the Red Ridge Gorge, stretching out in a column. The vanguard commander was at the Golden Core, experienced, cautious. He had read Liu Bao's report and knew about the ambush last time. He raised the shields, ordered them to march in tight formation, to cover each other. A smart move. Useless. The archers on the ridges opened fire, crossfire, from both sides, just like last time. But this time the cultivators were ready. Their chi shields, flared gold and blue, formed a turtle formation, covering each other. Bullets struck the shields and bounced off. Sparks of chi flew in all directions. Kane watched from above and counted. The cultivators on body laying were falling. Their shields were too weak. The bullets passed right through. 4 in the first 10 seconds, then 2 more. The chi condensation lasted longer. The shield stopped the first bullet, the second with difficulty, the third, no. But in the turtle formation, the neighboring shield closed the gaps. They were learning. Quickly. Every fight with them would be harder than the last. Kane understood that. 3 cultivators on the Golden Core leaped onto the gorge walls. They ran up the vertical rock, chi in their legs, the light step technique. Fast, deadly. If they reached the ridge, the archers would die in seconds. Mei Li took out the first one halfway up. 300 paces, at a moving target, on a vertical wall. The bullet pierced the Golden Core's shield the moment the cultivator redistributed his chi to his legs for the next leap. The shield weakened for a split second. Mei Li had been waiting for exactly this moment. She had been watching them for a year, studying them, counting the rhythm. She knew when the shield weakened. The cultivator broke away from the wall and fell down. 30 meters. A dull thud against the stone. The second one reached the ridge. He leaped over the edge, sword in hand. The Golden Core's aura blazed around his body. He saw the shooters, 4 of them, women, with long iron rods. Clay. He stepped toward the nearest one and swung his sword. Thor spun the handle of the machine gun. 6 barrels roared. The sound was not like that of a rifle, heavier, deeper. A continuous roar. A torrent of lead with a density unheard of in handguns. 200 bullets a minute, each 10 grams of steel and lead. The Golden Core's shield held for a second. The golden glow flickered and trembled under the hail of blows. 2 seconds. The glow began to dim. Cracks ran across the shield like thin ice. On the 3rd second, it cracked. On the 4th, it vanished. On the 5th, the cultivator fell, riddled with holes. Torvin twisted the handle. His face was motionless, his hands steady. A blacksmith at a new forge. The same rhythm, the same precision. Only instead of a hammer, the handle of a machine gun. And instead of steel on the anvil, an enemy who for 30 years had told him to bow lower than clay. The 3rd cultivator on the wall saw what had happened to the 2nd. He froze for half a second. That was enough. Mei Li fired. He fell. The vanguard retreated. The survivors withdrew through the entrance to the gorge, leaving 20 bodies on the rocks. Kane counted. 20 out of 50. 40% casualties in 3 minutes of fighting. 208 rounds expended. 2,792 remaining. Not a single casualty among the riflemen. Not a single wounded. So far. Zihao was not surprised. He stood behind the pass and listened to the roar. He counted the shots. He waited. When the survivors returned, he listened to the report. He nodded. He had expected this. He had read Liu Bao's reports. He knew about the ambushes. He knew about the gorge. He had sent the vanguard not for victory, for reconnaissance. 50 men for information. By his standards, an acceptable price. Now he knew how many barrels were on the ridges, knew the positions, knew the rate of fire, knew about the new weapon that fires continuously. And he went himself. The 200 remaining cultivators did not move through the gorge, through the passes. 3 columns, a 3-sided encirclement. Classic encirclement tactics. Zihao knew the mountains. He had prepared, studied the maps, found the bypass trails. He was smart, methodical. He didn't like to rush. 2 engineers from different eras clashed on the same battlefield, and each built his strategy from the variables he knew. Hannah's landmines detonated at the first pass. The explosion blew away 20 paces of the trail and 10 cultivators along with it. Rocks flew in all directions. Dust rose like a wall. Screams. A roar. The second landmine detonated 3 seconds after the first, just as the survivors rushed back straight into the blast zone. 5 more. At the second pass, 2 of the 3 landmines detonated. The third failed. The fuse had become damp from a crack in the rock and failed to ignite. Kana cursed in port slang so fiercely that one of her men blushed. 7 killed at the second pass. The third column passed without casualties. Hana retreated to the tunnels. Along the way, she set fire to dry branches on the trail so the smoke would block the advancing enemy's view. A small thing, but in battle there are no small things. Kane was shuffling the riflemen around, quickly, precise, short commands, position, sector, distance. From the ridges to positions at the tunnel entrances. 3 entrances, 3 lines of defense, machine guns at each. Shooters behind stone parapets they'd been building for the past 2 weeks. Sandbags, wooden shields sheathed in iron. Not against swords, against the stone fragments that fly when a cultivator strikes the wall. The battle turned into a siege. The cultivators didn't venture into the tunnels. They were smarter. They saw what had happened in the gorge. They saw what happened at the passes. They learned, quickly, just as Kane had foreseen. They surrounded the mountain and began to wait. Time was on their side. Kane was running out of food and water. They had the entire continent behind them. Reinforcements, provisions, time. Everything was on their side. All they had to do was wait. And Zihao waited. An hour, 2, 3. By noon, a ring of 170 cultivators stood around the mountain. 30 were dead. The rest were alive and angry. By evening, Zihao stood before the main entrance, alone, standing tall, open. The golden aura of soul fusion burned around him like a small sun, bright and steady. Not a single shooter fired. Not because Kane had ordered them not to shoot, because everyone knew that a rifle bullet wouldn't pierce the soul fusion shield. Not even a machine gun would pierce it. This was the level at which a man ceased to be human and became something greater. Sun Zihao stood there, unafraid. He could have demolished the tunnel entrance with a single blow, collapsed the vault, buried everyone inside under thousands of tons of rock. But he needed Kane alive. He needed secrets. He needed a weapon. A weapon that could kill 2 cultivators in 3 minutes. Such a weapon in the hands of the Sun Dynasty would make it the first among the 7. Forever. He shouted into the darkness of the tunnel. His voice, amplified by chi, rolled through the tunnels and echoed off the walls like thunder. He said he was giving Kane an hour to think it over. Come out with the blueprints. The teen will stay alive. The blacksmith will receive an honorable exile. The weapon will become the property of the Song Dynasty. A fair offer, a generous one. 1 hour. Kane stood deep in the tunnel and listened. Zihao's voice faded into the stone. The echo died away. Silence. Mei Li was nearby, rifle in her hands, her face calm, ready. Torvin behind the machine gun, hands on the grip. Lian at the ammunition rack, counting the remaining rounds. 2,411. Hannah was reloading the magazines, quick, precise movements. Ethan, deep inside, was jotting down her final notes in a notebook, just in case. Jing Yue stood by the wall, rosary beads in her hands, eyes closed, lips moving. Maybe she was praying. Maybe she was counting. Kane looked at the clock. Not mechanical, water-powered, homemade. A clay vessel with a hole, water dripping into a measuring cup. Rough, but it shows the time to within 5 minutes. An hour. 60 minutes. 3,600 seconds. Cain counted in his head. Food supplies for 12 days, water for 10, ammo for 2 serious battles, maybe 3 if he conserved it. Zihao could wait a month. Cain didn't have a month. He had an hour. And one idea. He turned to Liane and asked for a map of the tunnel. She didn't go get a map. She crouched down, took a pencil, and drew it from memory in 30 seconds. All the tunnels, all the turns, all the exits, all the levels, including the lower one. That very one. The old drainage channels that the miners dug 300 years ago to divert groundwater from the mine. Narrow, low, forgotten by everyone except Liane, who found them on an old map, which Ethan found. In the archives she gained access to through Sun Yihei. Cain looked at the map, at the drainage channels, at their layout. They ran beneath the tunnels, beneath the mountain, and emerged on the slope, the very slope where Sun's army was now stationed. Cain then smiled, that smile which, in his past life, his colleagues at the military factory called dangerous, an engineer's smile, the smile of a man who had found the solution to a problem everyone considered unsolvable. He said he wouldn't go out, and he wouldn't wait an hour. He turned to Hannah, asked how much gunpowder was left in reserve. Hannah replied, 300 liters. Cain nodded. Enough. 300 pounds of saltpeter mixture, laid last night. While the Sun army was climbing the mountain road, Hannah and her people were working below, underground, in the drainage channels, around the perimeter of the mountain, carrying sacks of gunpowder, scattering it, packing it down, laying a trail of gunpowder from sack to sack, from channel to channel. 2 days, without sleep, without stopping, because Cain knew the army was coming and knew that the ravines and landmines wouldn't be enough. Something more was needed. Something would make even the Union of Souls retreat. Every person on the team put a part of themselves into this plan. Sun Yihei found a mention of drainage channels in the archives. Ethan found a map. Leon memorized every turn and every meter. Hannah laid the trail. Torvin reinforced the arches so the channels wouldn't collapse prematurely. Mei Li covered the entrances while the rest worked below. Teamwork. A workshop. Division of labor. Everyone does what they do best. That's exactly how wars are won. Not with a hero's sword, with the hands of the team. Cain stepped out to the tunnel entrance, alone, without a rifle, without a pistol, with a lighter in his hand. A small one, flint and steel, homemade, like everything he did. He walked down the tunnel toward the light, and with every step the air grew colder. A winter wind blew toward him. Snow lay white and untouched at the entrance. 100 paces behind him stood Sun Zihao, a golden aura, absolute confidence, absolute power. He saw Cain and smirked. A lone figure in a blacksmith's leather apron, unarmed, without a shield, without chi. Clay. Zihao asked if the blacksmith had really decided to give up so quickly. The hour wasn't up yet. Cain didn't answer the question. He stopped at the entrance. He looked at Zihao, then at the mountainside behind him, at the cultivators standing in a circle around him, at the swords, at the auras, at the chi shields, at this entire world that considered itself eternal and unshakable. And he said calmly and evenly that he was standing on 300 li of gunpowder. Zihao frowned. The word gunpowder meant nothing to him. He was hearing it for the first time. Cain explained, briefly. The same substance that propels bullets from barrels, the same substance that blew up the mountain passes, only 300 times more. A trail of gunpowder runs from his feet 300 paces in every direction, through the drainage channels, underground, beneath the ground where Sun's cultivators stood. The explosion would bring down the mountainside. A rockfall would bury everyone within a 200-step radius of the entrance, including Cain himself. Soon Zihao was silent. His aura burned brighter. Cain could see the glow pulsing, how it reacted to the emotions Zihao was suppressing inside. He could survive the explosion. Soul fusion is a level at which a person becomes nearly invulnerable to physical damage. Nearly. The rockfall wouldn't kill him, perhaps, but his people, his 170 cultivators. They were standing on the mountainside, on the ground beneath which gunpowder was laid. For them, the explosion meant death. For many, for most. And Zihao had brought them here. He was responsible for them. Even for a man who considered himself an executor of heaven's will, that mattered. Cain said he was an engineer, that he didn't fight, that he didn't swing a sword or hurl lightning, that he simply altered the conditions of the problem, just as he changed the composition of steel to make swords better, just as he changed the design of a barrel to make a bullet fly farther. He changes the variables. And right now, there is one variable: the lives of 170 people on the mountainside. Zihao asked if he was bluffing. His voice was steady, his face was calm, but his aura wavered. For a split second. Cain noticed. Cain struck the flint, a spark, small, yellow, bright against the white snow. It fell onto a rock at his feet, next to a dark streak leading into a crack in the rock. The streak was real, a powder trail. The first 20 steps were real. Beyond that, nothing. Hana didn't make it. She was 2 hours short. But Zihao didn't know that. He saw the spark. He saw the trail. He saw the blacksmith's face, on which there was not a shadow of doubt. Zihao took a step back. One step back. The first step back in his life. Sun Zihao of the Song Dynasty, Soul Fusion stage. The man who could kill Cain with a glance. He took a step back from the blacksmith with the lighter. Cain said it wasn't a bluff. His voice didn't waver. That the next spark would travel down the path. That Zihao had 10 seconds to lead the people away. Or not to lead them away. The choice was his. Cain began to count, out loud. 10, 9, 8. Zihao looked at Cain, at the lighter in his hand, at the dark streak at his feet, at the mountainside where his army stood. 7, 6, 5. Zihao turned and shouted the order. "Retreat, immediately!" His voice, amplified by chi, rolled through the mountains. The cultivators backed away, quickly. They didn't run. Sun's cultivators don't run, but they retreated very quickly, in an orderly fashion, silently, with their swords at the ready, but with their backs to the blacksmith. Zihao brought up the rear, without taking his eyes off Cain. He stopped at the edge of the gorge. He turned around. He shouted that he would return, with such force that not even a name would remain of the blacksmith. His voice struck the rock, and the echo carried it across the mountains. Then he left. A golden aura flashed behind the rock and vanished. Cain stood at the entrance to the tunnel, a lighter in his hand. The wind ruffled his hair. Snowflakes settled on his shoulders. He stood and waited until the last cultivator disappeared over the pass. He counted, every one, down to the last. 170 figures heading east. When the last one vanished behind the rocks, Cain stood for another minute. Just stood there. Then his legs gave way. He sat down on a rock at the entrance, heavily, like a man who had been carrying a mountain on his back and had finally set it down on the ground. His hands were shaking. The lighter slipped from his fingers and clattered against the rock. It rolled to the edge. Cain watched it and couldn't bring himself to pick it up. Leanne was the first to run up, rifle on her back, eyes wide. She had seen him from behind, from the depths of the tunnel. She'd seen him standing alone before the golden aura, counting aloud. She'd seen it and couldn't breathe. She grabbed him by the shoulders, slender fingers with ingrained coal dust on her leather apron. Cain looked at her and said everything was fine, that it had worked, that he'd been bluffing.
Lean froze. Her hands on his shoulders froze. The gunpowder under the mountain was real, 300 pounds, real, laid out, and ready to go off. But the powder trail hadn't been laid all the way to the end. Hannah hadn't made it in time. She was 2 hours short. 2 hours, 120 minutes. If Cain had struck the flint over the real fuse, the explosion wouldn't have gone further than 20 paces. It wouldn't have been enough to bring down the slope. It wouldn't have been enough to kill an army. It would have been enough to kill only Cain. He was bluffing, with a lighter in his hand and 300 years of history behind him, with a face on which there was not a shadow of doubt, because an engineer knows what confidence looks like. Because 20 years at a military factory teaches you to keep a straight face when the bolt of an experimental rifle cracks under pressure and everyone in the room knows the next second could be their last. And Zihao believed it, because Cain's bluff had a basis. The gunpowder was real, the channels were real, the path was real. Just short, 20 steps long, and Zihao couldn't have known its length. Lian sat down on a rock next to him. She rested her head on his shoulder. She didn't say anything, she just sat there, warm, close by. Snowflakes fell on her hair and didn't melt. Mei Li approached. She was carrying Ethan, who had twisted her ankle on the stairs in the tunnel while running toward the third exit according to the evacuation plan. Ethan clutched a leather case with notebooks to her chest. 4 notebooks, all the knowledge that Cain had brought from another world. Ethan looked at Cain, and there was an expression on her face that he couldn't read, something between horror and admiration. Mei Li set her down gently. She looked at Cain. She smiled. She said he was crazy. Cain didn't argue. Torvin was the last to emerge from the tunnel. His hands were black with gunpowder soot. His apron was scorched in 3 places. He stood by the machine gun until the very last moment, ready to pull the trigger if Zihao didn't believe him. He looked at his son for a long time, then he nodded. A single nod, heavy, like a hammer striking an anvil. A living blacksmith is forging. His son is alive. That is enough. Hannah returned from the back roads, on horseback. The horse was covered in soap. Hannah was dirty, tired, 2 days without sleep, with a grin on her face, a wide one. Her gold earrings glinted in the sunset. She said that the Sun Cultivators had set a world record for the speed of an organized retreat with the entire force while maintaining battle formation. And she added that if Cain ever decided to go into business, she'd take him on as a partner because a man who could bluff like that on the market would strike it rich. Jing Yue emerged from the tunnel, quiet, prayer beads in her hand, a white strand of hair blowing in the wind. She hadn't taken part in the battle. She didn't have to, but she was ready every second. She looked at Cain, at his face, at his hands, which were still trembling, and she said quietly that his mother would be pleased. Cain looked at her. She knew. Of course she knew. For 20 years, she had remembered the face of the woman she was half a day too late to meet. And now she saw that face in her son's features. Cain said nothing. He just nodded. From the direction of the northern trail, a lone figure on horseback appeared. Sun Yihei, disheveled, in a travel dress smeared with mud, without her jade comb, without jewelry, without anything that would indicate she was the daughter of the head of the dynasty. Just a girl on a tired horse. She dismounted. She approached Cain. Her eyes were red from the wind and from the tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed for 3 days. She said that her father, the head of the Sun dynasty, Jiang He, had disowned his son Zihao for the unauthorized campaign, that the Sun elders had voted, that the head was requesting negotiations, that the elders' word was given. A truce, negotiations, recognition. Cain looked at her, then at Lian beside her, at her slender fingers on his shoulder, at Mei Li, who stood with a rifle behind her back and squinted at the sunset, at Ethan, who sat on a rock with notebooks on her lap and rubbed her sore leg, at Torvin at the entrance to the tunnel, hands covered in soot, back straight,
At Hana on horseback with a smirk and gold earrings. At Jingyue with prayer beads and a strand of white hair. At the riflemen emerging from the tunnels one after another. Women. Men. Rootless. Those whom the world called clay. With rifles on their shoulders and gunpowder soot on their faces and weariness in their eyes and something else. Something they didn't have 3 years ago. Dignity. 120 people who had just stopped 200 cultivators. Not with swords, not with chi, not with the strength given at birth or taken away. With the strength they forged themselves, with their own hands, in the tunnel, by the furnace, at the workbench. A strength that cannot be taken away because it does not lie in spiritual roots. It lies in the mind, in the hands, in the blueprints on paper and the formulas in notebooks, in the memory of the red-haired girl from the orphanage, in the eyes of the 13-year-old girl who, 3 years ago, hauled coal and now draws maps from memory that save lives. Kane looked up at the winter sky, white, clear, cold. The first stars were appearing in the east. He exhaled a cloud of steam and thought that his mother would be pleased. The small, quiet woman who died of a fever because the healer didn't go down to the clay. She would be pleased. Not because Elder He is dead, not because Zi Hao has retreated, but because her son is standing here, alive, and not alone. Surrounded by people who had come to him because he saw in them not clay, but people. Then Kane stood up, brushed the snow off his knees, picked up the lighter, stashed it in his pocket, turned to the team, and said it was time to forge. Because a living blacksmith forges, and they had a lot of work ahead of them.